I am Kyla's stepmother, currently in a relationship, quite similar to a romantic one. You might ask how that could be possible, but there's a valid reason for everything. Let me confess what happened to us. We met through our parents' introduction. Kyla's dad was a divorcee and I was unmarried. I worked as a freelancer with a slightly higher income than office workers. I took pride in my job and enjoyed working, but I was introduced to a man, supposedly very diligent, who was divorced and raising his son alone. Turns out, Kyle's dad was a man dedicated to his family. When Kyle became a middle school student, his mother expressed her desire to travel overseas with friends, and she traveled abroad twice a year. Kyle's dad, believing she deserved the break, after raising Kyle, willingly supported her financially. However, the world was too small a place. A friend of Kyle's dad noticed Kyle's mother walking arm in arm with another man, secretly took a photo and sent it to Kyle's dad. Kyle's mother had not gone on a trip with a friend but with her secret lover. She pretended not to know Kyle's dad's friend, who she knew well, at the vacation spot. Kyle's dad was a man who worked diligently to support his family, and family was all that he knew. Kyle was a gentle and exemplary student, who took care of everything if his meals and laundry were taken care of. Kyle's mother had an affair with a man she met at an alumni meeting, and upon seeing a photo of her overseas, taken by a friend, Kyle's dad followed her. He had believed she was playing her roles as a mother and wife well, but it felt like the sky was falling when he saw her entering a motel with another man. Looking back, she had changed her phone patterns, locked her phone over trivial matters, and stopped caring for Kyle. She failed to prepare proper meals for her teenage son, and only cared about her own appearance. She seemed quite happy, giggling while looking at her phone. She had a boyfriend, so she was happy, and she didn't care about her son. Kyle's dad made the big decision to get a divorce by mutual consent and lived with Kyle. People around him couldn't let him. Family-oriented man with financial stability, live alone. They kept introducing him to other women. That's how he and I met. Kind eyes, gentle speech, and a handsome face were Kyle's dad's trademarks. I wanted to give him bonus points for being a man with a grown-up son. I mean, he took full responsibility for his son. When we got married as Kyle started high school, our family of 3 lived happily. Kyle called me Mom and he said, "I hope you live well with Dad. I trust Mom and will follow her," while talking about his biological mother's wrongdoings. So I took good care of Kyle. Kyle's dad suggested having a baby, but I was rather old, and for Kyle's emotional stability, I said we shouldn't have a baby. We were living happily in our new family when Kyle's dad was hit by a car, driven by a drunk driver on his way home from work, and died on the spot. What was so urgent that he had to leave us, less than 2 years after we started living together? I resented the heavens. Moreover, when Kyle was in his junior year of high school, such an incident occurred. After losing his father, Kyle seemed lost for a while, but then focused on his studies. Seeing him like this made me feel strong, and we lived supporting each other. Some people said that since he was not my biological child, and now an adult, he should move out, but I could never do that to Kyle. He had many traits similar to his father. His father used to clean up the dishes after meals, fold laundry together, tidy up the bathroom after taking a bath, and even organize the groceries together when he came back from the supermarket. After his father had gone to heaven, Kyle helped me keep things in order around the house, just like his father. Seeing Kyle like this was a comfort to me, who was feeling depressed due to my husband's absence. Kyle became a college student and started dating a girl. They were the same age and had been dating for a year when Kyle said he was going to join the military, and she broke up with him. She said she couldn't see him when she wanted to, so she would meet a senior in her department who liked her. Seeing Kyle so sad after being dumped by his first girlfriend was heartbreaking. I thanked him for trusting me and confiding in me, and when he smiled and said, "I'll meet a good woman like you someday," I felt relieved. Kyle joined the Air Force, and although his military service was a bit long, he had more leaves and outings. On his first leave, Kyle said that military life was very hard at first. I suggested going to Broadway to see a musical and clear his head, and Kyle was thrilled and followed me. To introduce myself, I inherited good genes from my parents. Since I was young, I was taller than most girls my age, and thankfully, I didn't gain weight in proportion to the amount of food I ate. With a height of 173 cm and a weight of only 60 kg, I was quite slim. Moreover, with my bright skin tone, high nose, and deep double eyelids, people would whisper, "Look at that woman, isn't she pretty?" as I passed by. I somewhat enjoyed such attention. Excited to go to downtown after a long time, I wore a dress I used to wear when I was working. The length of the dress was above the knee, and the zipper was at the back, and I needed Kyle's help to zip it up. When I linked arms with Kyle, we looked more like an aunt and her nephew than a mother and son. We watched a musical in Broadway, and the curtain went up, and the lights went out. Only the stage was brightly lit, and we watched the show holding hands. As we immersed ourselves in the performance, it seemed that Kyle's mood was gradually becoming brighter. We went into a Western restaurant in Haiwadong Alley, with bright lights known for its good steak. Kyle's face was much brighter than before the show. Kyle had his first beer after entering college, and I felt a different emotion that I had never felt before. Handsome Kyle attracted attention wherever he went. Under the restaurant lights, Kyle's face shone even brighter, and during the meal, I harbored a thought that I shouldn't have. To be honest, that was the first time I felt a manly scent from Kyle. When he realized my skirt was short, he took off his jacket and covered my knees. His mannerism reminded me of my husband, and I burst into tears. Kyle, startled, said, "Mom, it's a happy day today. You came out with me to help me relieve my stress, and we had such a good time. Why are you like this?" and comforted me. I had missed my husband so much, but I had never shown it in front of Kyle. However, that day I couldn't hold back my emotions. We barely finished the meal, and I managed to put on a smile as we returned home. Kyle came into the master bedroom, slightly unzipped my dress, and went to his room. Kyle returned in 2 days, and I immersed myself in work. Even during my busy schedule, I found myself smiling involuntarily, thinking of Kyle's warm hand held during the musical. The next incident with Kyle was during his next leave. It was in the winter when Kyle was 22. At that time, there was a movie achieving record-breaking success, and I was saving it to watch with Kyle. Kyle was adapting to military life, and he looked happier than when he first came out on leave. I purposely suggested watching the movie at a downtown cinema, and Kyle complied. We bought a popcorn set, entered the cinema, and sat in the couple's seat, focusing on the movie while eating popcorn. Occasionally, I rested my head on Kyle's shoulder, and he naturally lent it to me. At that time, I felt a slight flutter in my heart from Kyle's arm around my shoulder. I don't even remember how I watched the movie because my heart was pounding. I was hoping the movie wouldn't end, and that Kyle wouldn't hear my fast-beating heart. Kyle eats anything well. I like seafood, so we went to a shellfish specialty restaurant, ordered a hot pot and salad, and had beer with it. That day, I found out for the first time how sweet beer could be. Kyle is weak to alcohol, but after drinking 3 shots, I don't know why his red cheeks looked so cute. We had various conversations, ordered more side dishes and beer, and went home. After each of us took a shower and sat down in the living room watching the news, Kyle said, "I want to sleep next to you tonight." I replied, "Okay, let's sleep together. I've been lonely sleeping alone every day without your dad." But I knew what Kyle meant. That night, a healthy son, and a young stepmother spent a very satisfying night. Several weeks passed after that day, until the day Kyle went out for a sleepover. I flipped through Kyle's album, thinking only of Kyle. The next time he had a sleepover, we naturally fell asleep in the same room without anyone making the first move. Looking at the picture of Kyle's dad hanging on the bedroom wall, I felt sorry, but I also felt a warm feeling as if he would understand me. Before I knew it, it was summer, and on the day Kyle came, we went on a date in short shorts. I was confident about my figure, and Kyle seemed to like my outfit. When we got home, we naturally slept in the same space at night, and I even bought new underwear to accept Kyle. Kyle said he was able to finish his military service well. Thanks to me, on the day he was discharged, and he bought chrysanthemum flowers and paid a visit to his father's charnel house. I closed my eyes and told my husband that he must be watching from heaven what I'm doing, and I hope he understands me, and if possible forgives me. Kyle, who had completed his military duty, helped me with my work before returning to school. To others, he is a son who listens well to his mother and is well-mannered. But only I know our big secret, so we were always happy. Who could have imagined that there is a stepmother who spends the night with her stepson born to her husband's ex-wife? I know well that I can't keep living like this with Kyle. If Kyle gets a new girlfriend, I'll welcome it any time. Sometimes I want to be a cool stepmother giving love advice. When Kyle and I feel lonely, who can say anything if we find each other? Even if people criticize our relationship and throw stones at us, I think we can handle it well.
On a late Friday evening in my office, I was assessing a few candidates who had heard about an upcoming vacancy in our office staff. I served as the regional head of a chemical company supplying products for control, fertilizer, and water containment for soil. Our company relied heavily on farmers who cultivated or supplied our food. Being environmentally conscious, we proudly boasted our products as completely eco-friendly, a pioneering move in our industry. 2 of my office staff's spouses had been promoted, prompting them to tender their resignations. Both would be relocating within the next 3 months, sparking a rush to fill their positions swiftly. Our sales team operated across 8 states in the heart of the nation. Surpassing our sales projections this year was a significant achievement. Kathy, my executive assistant, popped her head into my office to inform me, "Ed, all 8 candidates have confirmed their interview appointments for Monday. I'm off for the night." Every Thursday, I traveled to one of the states under my jurisdiction to conduct a half-day sales meeting on Fridays before returning home. Consequently, Thursday nights had become my wife's designated evening to socialize with her friends, albeit incurring considerable babysitting expenses over the years. My weekly excursions provided crucial face-to-face support for our sales representatives, fostering their job performance and problem-solving skills. This investment had yielded substantial returns over the years, with not a single resignation in 8 years, an accomplishment for our company. Today, I had just made it back in time to wrap up a few tasks before heading home. The company had persistently urged me to relinquish this aspect of my role, but I found the solitude during these trips invaluable for contemplation. With a wife who knew everything and 3 children, these moments of quiet reflection during drives were invaluable, besides sparing the branch the expense of hiring a sales manager. Maintaining a record of staying under budget was a priority for me. With our children in junior and senior high school, our eldest, a source of immense pride, set to graduate and attend Southeast Missouri University in the fall, our family was in a favorable position. Her full scholarship awarded by my employer was a significant boon. Our youngest daughter, just 16, was busy preparing for her learner's permit. Grace, my wife of 20 years, served as the executive assistant to the district attorney since our youngest's birth. The district attorney had recently been offered a lucrative position with the federal government, which he promptly accepted. Known for his no-nonsense approach, it was a no-brainer, given the substantial increase in salary. Despite being roughly the same age as me, he had never married. Contrary to rumors, I doubted he was gay. For the past 15 years, my parents had graciously taken our 3 children every second weekend of the month, affording my wife and me some much-needed quality time together. This gesture came at a pivotal moment in our marriage, allowing us to rediscover ourselves and ultimately strengthening our bond. Without their support, we might have added to the divorce statistics. They had approximately 3 months left before this chapter would close, as my eldest, Amy, was set to intern in our senator's office in Washington over the summer before embarking on her political science studies at the university. A while back, my dad, on a whim, purchased Ancestry.com kits for each of our 3 children, with my consent, and submitted them as a jest. Following their guidelines, we understood that a match would only occur if a relative had also submitted their DNA. My children discussed it with me, and I granted permission, acknowledging that we all have distant relatives we might not know about. Perhaps it would lead us on a new journey. Amy suggested keeping it a surprise for her mother until we received the results, aware it could take 5 or 6 months. This weekend we were traveling to Nashville to attend the Grand Ole Opry and would return home on Sunday. It was my wife who organized this special trip, aiming to create another cherished memory in our journey together. Update. During my final year at university, I crossed paths with my wife, Grace, at a football game. Contrary to being a player on the field, I was one of those anonymous vendors peddling overpriced snacks to the crowd. Grace, being one of the daughters of the team's medical staff, always had complimentary tickets at her disposal. An altercation ensued between her and her date over a trivial matter, resulting in a shove that inadvertently involved me. As she pushed him away, he collided with me, sending me tumbling down the concrete stairs with my food tray in tow. I regained consciousness in the hospital, my head swathed in bandages, the doctor informing me of 25 stitches due to a split forehead. Grace visited me daily, burdened with guilt, and met my entire family during my recovery from a week-long coma caused by internal injuries. As the haze lifted from my sight, I perceived an unfamiliar goddess-like figure before me, initially mistaking her for a celestial being guiding me to the afterlife. Yet the reality of my girlfriend, Esmeralda, standing by her side brought clarity, albeit disappointment to her reaction. Hoping it was all a dream, I drifted back into sleep, yearning for Esmeralda's absence upon awakening, a wish that materialized when I opened my eyes to find her gone, replaced by Grace, who steadfastly supported me as I pieced my life back together. Though I never formally asked her, our relationship naturally evolved, culminating in marriage 3 months later as Grace walked down the aisle, captivating with her 5'8" stature, long blonde locks, deep blue-black eyes, and an enviable figure. By our 5th year together, we found ourselves at a crossroads, contemplating separation without fully comprehending the reasons behind our drift. Despite my confusion, Grace and I remained committed, eventually resolving to overcome whatever obstacles lay ahead. We had just departed from Lambert's on our way home, a restaurant coasting on its reputation. Their claim to fame was tossing large buns across the room for customers to catch, overshadowing the otherwise lackluster, overcooked food. We made the stop at this tourist trap because it evoked memories of my wife's mother's cooking. Need I say more? Grace initiated a conversation with me, expressing her thoughts on the concept of infidelity within our marriage. She suggested that I should explore the idea of having an affair, indicating that she would approve of it. Grace reasoned that societal norms regarding marriage vows had changed and that I should reconsider my stance. She believed that such an experience might enrich our relationship and deepen our understanding of each other. Her perspective troubled me, suggesting a willingness to exploit others for personal gratification, a stance I couldn't accept. It revealed a side of her I hadn't seen before, reshaping my perceptions considerably. "Let me ask you this, my dear wife," I countered. "Why is it so important to you that I have your blessing for an affair? Have I done something so repulsive that you're seeking a reason to end our marriage?" 5 minutes of silence ensued before I resumed the music, her lack of response speaking volumes. Grace was always quick with an answer, but now she was silent, leaving me to ponder why. I couldn't shake the feeling that my wife's sudden approval of an affair was significant, though its motive remained elusive. Regardless, I was convinced something was amiss in our lives and resolved to uncover it. Driving for an hour, we were about 40 miles from home when Grace again silenced the sound. I switched on the recorder once more. "I apologize, Ed," she said. "I suppose I've been indulging in too many Harlequin romance stories. Those notions must have come from out of nowhere." Having said that, she resumed the sound system, assuming the matter was settled. However, the dilemma arose from the fact that both our children and I knew she despised those books, as they had been her mother's favorite. Throughout her life, she had dismissed them as lowbrow and beneath her. Whenever her mother passed the latest editions to her, Grace would promptly discard them. During the last leg of our drive, I realized the only aspect of her life I knew little about was her Thursday night outings with her friends. It hadn't seemed significant or concerning enough to inquire about. On the rare occasions when I was home, she willingly altered her plans to spend the evening with me. Until today, I had no reason to doubt those nights, as I had complete trust in her. However, following our recent conversation, I found myself questioning the nature of her girls' night out. Was she frequenting bars with her friends, engaging in questionable activities like one-night stands? By the time we arrived home, I resolved to uncover the truth about her Thursday night outings. After settling in at home, I spent some time with my parents, enjoying their company and hearing about their weekend activities. They mentioned wanting to have a private chat with me the following day, expressing concern about my wife and her youngest daughter, but didn't elaborate further. We agreed to meet around 3 o'clock when I would be available after my job interviews. Later, when saying goodbye, I assured them I'd address their concerns after work. Once they left, I informed my wife about the plan to visit my parents the next day to fix something, ensuring she was aware of the potential delay for dinner. She acknowledged it, assuring me it was fine to eat later. My dad and mom arrived promptly, and we ushered them into my office. After settling in, we waited for one of the staff to bring us coffee. Once served, Kathy closed the door as she left. "Ed," my dad began, "I deeply regret sending in our grandchildren's DNA. They found a match for April. She has a grandmother on her father's side searching for her son and his descendants." With that, he produced the form from Ancestry.com, displaying a lady's name and phone number. I was devastated, and my father could see the impact the news had on me. "Dad, I don't believe it's a mistake. Let's see what we can find out together," I said. Using the office phone, I dialed the number and activated both the recording and speaker functions to ensure a permanent record of the conversation. After 2 rings, someone answered. "I'm Edward Paul Adams, seeking Mrs. Beatrice Smith regarding a DNA match from Ancestry.com, I explained. "May I speak with her?" "You're speaking with her, young man," came the reply. "What can I do for you?" "It's complicated," I replied. "Long story short, I've just learned that my youngest daughter is your granddaughter." "Are you referring to April Marie Adams?" she asked. "Yes," I confirmed. "Then perhaps you know my son, whom I had to give up for adoption at 15, Mrs. Smith continued. "I might if I knew his name," I responded. "He was adopted by a family named Barrow. His given names were Luke Robert," Mrs. Smith revealed. My heart sank. My parents and I recognized the name all too well. Her candid admission had turned into a nightmare for me. "He's alive and well," I disclosed. "Currently, he serves as the district attorney here in Cape Girardeau County, Missouri. He's also my wife's boss. And now, I think I understand why he never married." "He's my only child," Mrs. Smith confessed. "I'm battling stage 4 lung cancer and don't have much time left. Would you allow April to visit me before I pass away? If needed, I'll cover the expenses. I want to meet her and pass on my estate to her." "Given the circumstances, I'll let you coordinate with my parents. They'll arrange for her to visit this weekend," I agreed. "But I can't let her travel alone. Is there anything else you need?" "Please provide a notary statement for my lawyer to conduct a DNA test," Mrs. Smith requested. "He'll want to verify her identity before changing my will, given the value of her inheritance." "No problem. I'll hand over the call to my dad and he'll handle the details," I assured her. Exiting my office, I handed Kathy my personal recorder, instructing her to transcribe and notarize both my conversation and the phone call. "This is necessary for the divorce proceedings," I added. "Do you want the authorization for the DNA test drawn up too?" Kathy inquired, demonstrating her keen awareness of the situation. "Yes, please, but keep it quiet for a few weeks. I want to investigate my soon-to-be ex-wife's Thursday night activities, I replied. Turning to my assistant, David, I requested his and his wife's cooperation for a personal matter, signaling the seriousness of the situation. Shorty should be finishing her dispatch soon. I'll text her to come over right away, David responded, recognizing the gravity of the situation. I returned to my office and we reached an agreement. Using the spare key they had for my house, they planned to pack some clothes for April and leave next Friday. I'd have her pulled out of school and drop her off at their place by 10 o'clock. As I saw my parents off, David's wife entered. I directed her to his office, where I'd join them shortly. Thanks to modern communication methods, Kathy had already made copies and transcribed the documents. I handed David and Cheryl a copy, suggesting they start with my conversation with my wife. I gave Kathy the paperwork my dad had provided to make copies for my lawyer's files, instructing her to find the best. Cheryl and David, longtime acquaintances, were deeply affected by recent revelations concerning my wife and me. Cheryl, particularly, had a close relationship with Grace, having grown up as neighbors. The discovery of the truth had left them both shocked. We discussed potential actions to uncover more information. I suggested a plan involving David using my company car for sales trips, while Cheryl would use David's car with the pretext of cross-training for the next 3 months. Meanwhile, I planned to follow my wife on Thursday nights to gather evidence discreetly. My suspicion grew as I recounted recent events, particularly Grace's suggestion for me to have an affair. I speculated that she might be planning to move with Luke Robert Barrow, which could lead to justifying a divorce in her eyes if she could prove my infidelity. Cheryl expressed her agreement and suggested involving the police to gather more detailed information about their activities. She even mentioned a contact who could help arrange it. Later, Kathy informed us about Dale Allen Britton's departure from the district attorney's office and his new practice. Cheryl asked me to convey her regards to Dale when I visited him. In summary, we devised a plan to uncover more information and sought legal counsel to handle the situation. I left to meet Dale, a man involved in the women's right to life movement, challenging Roe v. Wade in the Supreme Court. His unconventional approach to the law was shaking up everything he touched. Things started to make sense. My marital issues with Grace coincided with her employment under Luke Barrow, around the time I was promoted to sales manager, requiring frequent overnight sales meetings. If they were indeed having an affair every Thursday night, I had unknowingly been deceived for over 15 years. The expensive gifts from Luke to Grace now seemed suspicious. Dale was ready for me when I arrived. Cheryl had briefed him on our plans. He provided me with access to Luke Barrow's house and the alarm code. Handing me a phone number, he said it would connect me with helpful services at a reasonable price. Having grown up on the streets, Dale still had connections to get things done. The access codes he provided would remain valid until the end of the week, after which Luke would be reminded to change them. Dale planned to sue Barrow for child support from April's birth, potentially bankrupting him under state law. He also suggested temporarily transferring my parental authority to my parents until the court case concluded, to prevent accusations of manipulation. I offered to pay him up front, but he declined, fearing Grace would detect it. Instead, he requested a check, to be cashed after the legal proceedings commenced. His strategic thinking assured me that he had my best interests at heart. I left with the impression that Dale had his own motives for targeting Luke Barrow. Both Grace and Luke were in for a rude awakening. Dale Britton had devised his own strategy for the divorce proceedings. Update. I completed all necessary paperwork, granting my parents parental rights over April starting Friday, and provided them with a copy. After Dale and I briefed them on the situation, they agreed it was the right move. I waited for Cheryl to arrive in her 2002 Ford Taurus as David was away on his first sales trip. Cheryl would leave her car with me and take David's home. My eldest informed me that their mother wouldn't be home for dinner, joining her friends straight from work. Once Cheryl arrived, we swapped cars, and I packed my suitcase in the trunk. "Ed," Cheryl said, "dispatch and the guys are ready. Just tell me where to go." "Thanks," I replied. "Dale wants me to call him if we proceed so he can serve them personally. I'm curious about Dale's vendetta against Luke Barrow." "Dale's all about principles," Cheryl explained. "Luke's known for not sticking to his word." It was intriguing to observe Grace and Luke depart in separate cars, meeting later at Charlie's Bar and Grill for dinner. Afterward, they went their separate ways. I positioned myself near Luke Barrow's residence, with Dale's associates, now my team, fully prepared. I had a clear view of Luke's house from a safe location. Grace arrived first, disabling the alarm with a code and unlocking the door. We recorded her entering. Moments later, Luke pulled in and Grace greeted him at the door. Her blouse was open, braless, revealing her cleavage. Luke embraced her, kissing passionately. As they entered, I ceased filming. 6 rooms in Luke's house were wired for audio and video, courtesy of his neighbor's son serving time. Everything inside was streamed live on their Facebook pages. They were monitoring my car, expecting me to seek a new romantic interest. Anticipating this, they had hired a courtesan who matched my preferences. I alerted Cheryl, who informed David. As an ex-Marine, he skillfully veered off-road safely at 10 p.m., then called for assistance. Cheryl notified me, and I confirmed the green light, providing the address. While awaiting developments, I tampered with the valves in their car tires, ensuring they couldn't escape the predicament they were about to face. The adulterous pair wouldn't be going anywhere anytime soon. The police officers arrived, sirens blaring, and banged on the door, seeking Grace Adams. Luke Barrows initially denied her presence until the cops pointed out her car in the driveway. Grace eventually appeared, clad only in a bedsheet. Mrs. Grace Adams, your husband Edward Paul's car was in a motor vehicle accident near Little Rock, Arkansas. We were directed to check here by your parents when we couldn't locate you, the officer stated, intentionally misleading her. Grace's face paled at the news. As the police departed, I followed closely behind. Every moment from their arrival to departure was recorded and streamed live on Facebook, providing irrefutable evidence of the ongoing affair to the citizens of Cape. At midnight, my daughter Amy called in distress, reporting that her mother hadn't returned home and wasn't answering calls. I advised her to contact Luke Barrow and insisted he put Grace on the phone. "Why him?" Amy questioned. "He's been her Thursday night companion for over 16 years, I revealed. After sending Amy a clip of Grace and Luke's encounter with the police, she soon discovered her mother's deception. Upon Amy's revelation, I instructed her to open the front door, preparing to confront Grace. As I retrieved my suitcase from the car, Dale Allen Britton called, informing me he had served restraining orders against Grace and Luke, prohibiting them from coming near us. "Amy, open the garage so I can park Cheryl's car inside," I instructed, pretending to be on my way to Little Rock. We complied with the plan. Amy questioned the recent locksmith visit, to which I confirmed it was part of our preparations, prompted by the DNA test my father submitted to Ancestry.com, revealing a match for April, and uncovering Grace's connection to her boss, who turned out to be the son she gave up for adoption at 15. Amy, my daughter, became emotional. I embraced her tightly until she regained composure. Then we dimmed the lights and retreated to the kitchen for a private conversation. I activated my voice recorder and played the discussion between her mother and me during our return journey from Nashville. It provided Amy with insight into her mother's words firsthand. "Why would Mom encourage you to have an affair, Dad?" Amy inquired. "To mitigate the consequences of her own actions if they were ever exposed," I replied. Ironically, her suggestion led to the truth emerging. A soft knock interrupted us. Since I wasn't expected to be home, Amy answered the door. It was a police officer who informed us that they had intercepted a taxi carrying Grace. They warned her of violating a court order if she proceeded further. Throughout the night, my eldest daughter and I discussed Grace's actions. We both agreed that given her talent for storytelling during her girls' night out, she should have pursued a career in writing. Amy expressed disbelief at the revelation that her mother had been having an affair with the same man for over 16 years. She wondered why they hadn't noticed sooner. I explained that it was easy to overlook because the kids were young, and I frequently traveled for work, trusting in our relationship and seeing no reason to question Grace's activities. Amy reflected on how their trust in Grace had blinded them to the truth. Realizing the extent of Grace's manipulation, I was stunned. Amy pointed out that the most painful aspect was how Grace had exploited their trust to maintain her affair. As Amy went to make coffee, I noticed the dawn approaching and received a text from Grace, urgently requesting to talk about a family issue concerning our oldest child before my return from the trip. Deciding how to respond, I reassured Amy and replied to Grace's message, declining her manipulation and informing her that she could continue her plans with Luke Barrow, but without the kids. I explained that Grace had wanted me to start an affair to use against me in divorce court and never expected to be caught after so many years. It must have been painful for Amy to hear the truth. Many struggle to accept harsh realities. Eventually, they will come to terms with it. I embraced my daughter as she shed tears once more. We had just calmed her down when Eric and April woke up. I turned on the kitchen TV to watch the morning news. Soon they joined us for breakfast, surprised to see me at home. We were all taken aback when my wife's image appeared on the screen. My son raised the volume out of curiosity. My heart went out to my kids as they heard Grace and Luke disparaging me, calling me foolish and clueless. Their mother then made a sarcastic comment about me, which caused both of them to burst into laughter. The reporter interjected, suggesting that they weren't laughing anymore after the scheme they had orchestrated to set up Edward Adams with a professional escort had backfired. The scene shifted to Dale serving them both with lawsuits, with the news reporter elaborating on the details. Alice ran to me, sobbing, and sat on my lap, discovering in a harsh way that her biological father wasn't her father, but her mother's long-term lover. Eric summed it up aptly, questioning what their mother's view of their father meant for the rest of them. Once April had composed herself, Amy and I explained what had occurred since their mother and I returned from Nashville. I arranged for them to be excused from school on Friday and Monday to process their emotions. Just as we were about to start breakfast, April exclaimed that the police chief was on the line. That caught our attention, so we turned up the volume. It was publicly announced that both Grace Adams and Luke Barrow, our current district attorney, were under criminal investigation. A special team from across the county was assembled to lead the inquiry. I thought to myself that when one's private actions become public, society cannot overlook them. Hypocrisy reigns in our society every day. After breakfast and tidying up, I had my 3 children sit down at the table. I showed each of them a copy of the letter my dad had received. Then I said, "April, my parents are picking you up to take you to meet your biological dad's mother. She's terminally ill and has requested to see you. There's a significant reason behind it, but I think it's best for the lady you're meeting to explain it to you. As far as I'm concerned, you are my daughter and always will be. If you have any questions, ask your grandparents." "Amy, can you assist your sister in packing for the weekend while I call my parents?" I asked. Once the girls left, my son asked, "How are you handling this, Dad?" "I'm struggling," I admitted. "I'm constantly fighting to keep myself composed. Remember, son, if this ever happens to you as a father, you have to stay strong for everyone else in your life." With that said, I called my parents and explained my whereabouts. They said they would come over as soon as they finished packing their car. They still had an hour before their flight. It was in that moment that my sons and my relationship changed forever, for the better. The 3 of us watched the daughter I had raised leave with my parents to meet her biological grandmother for the first time. I prayed fervently that it would go well and that she would return feeling the same about me. The atmosphere at the local district attorney's office resembled a morgue. Grace Adams had gone out to buy new clothes after having her car towed and the 4 tires' stems replaced. Meanwhile, Luke Barrow was reviewing the lawsuit against him. Although they lacked a direct DNA sample, the biological link was undeniable, leaving him unable to deny parentage. The truth about their relationship and long-term affair had become known to everyone on staff. This, along with concealing April Adams's true parentage, was turning into a political nightmare. Fraud under the law had evolved to encompass the failure to disclose all pertinent facts, leading Dale to sue both Grace and Luke jointly in a civil suit. It increasingly appeared that they had been deceiving Grace's husband, Ed, for years. While many lawyers affirmed Ed Adams and Dale Britton's likely success, those contacted so far were unwilling to get involved, likely due to Dale's formidable reputation in court. The Facebook exposure of their conduct and their admission of attempting to ruin an honest man to benefit themselves was headline news, given Ed's societal position. Grace, having frequented a familiar clothing store for years, never anticipated being confronted by a woman accusing her of insanity, claiming she should have foreseen the consequences. This revelation came when the lady accused her of appearing in compromising photos on Facebook for hours. Upon returning to Luke's house, Grace found a company finishing a service call, assuming she was the homeowner and suggesting resetting the security codes. Only later did she realize the lack of electronic signature verification. Calling Luke, Grace questioned who was trying to sabotage his new position in St. Louis, prompting her to reveal her discoveries. They both suspected deeper motives beyond Ed protecting himself, given the political nature of his new job. After making coffee, Grace reviewed the divorce petition. It stung to realize that her own words had aroused her husband's suspicions, especially her requests for him to deliberately damage others. Furthermore, the revelation from Mom and Dad Adams about the Ancestry.com DNA match exposed April's true parentage, offering undeniable proof of her affair and potentially jeopardizing their marriage before April's birth. At that moment, she realized Ed needed to know if the affair was ongoing. He had orchestrated the events of the previous night, revealing hidden truths about her life. Just as she took another sip of coffee, the doorbell rang. Rising, she answered it to find the neighbor Luke disliked. "Mr. Primrose," she greeted, "what can I do for you?" Handing her a legal envelope, he explained, "Ed used my place as a base for his operations against you and your long-term lover last night. I permitted it gladly as Luke Barrow had my son sentenced to the maximum. The information in this envelope shared with you last night will also be delivered to everyone on your side of the family this afternoon. Ed asked if you're still laughing at him." Watching him walk away with a broad smile, Grace returned to the kitchen and opened the envelope, filled with incriminating pictures. They depicted her entering Luke's house with her key, greeting him at the door, engaging in lovemaking activities, and being confronted by police officers. Ed's team was efficient, making it seem like he collaborated with police officers seeking retribution against Luke. The final signed page by her husband revealed the potential for significant public fallout, jeopardizing her plans to assert control over him. Now the priority was damage control to mitigate the fallout from Ed's public disclosure. Grace. By last Sunday evening, upon returning home from Nashville, it became apparent to me that you were scheming to orchestrate our divorce. Since then, I've been trying to discern what led your affection for me to transform into pure animosity. Now I understand the reason behind it. I realize you hold me responsible for what you perceive as deficiencies in your life during the period when we only had our 2 children. It seems you felt confined in our marriage and yearned for the carefree days of being single again. Otherwise, you wouldn't have willingly sought solace in another man to relive the single life. By doing so, you allowed him to temporarily whisk you away from what you despised a few hours each week. I recognize that the sole reason you remained in a marriage with a man you despised and saw as lifeless was because Luke didn't want the burden of raising kids, not even his own. With your perception of me, there was no way you'd leave the children alone with someone you considered worthless. Your pride wouldn't allow it, leading you to endure a lifetime of deliberate falsehoods. Every day you both evaded consequences, your disdain for me grew. I became increasingly foolish and incompetent in your eyes. How much laughter did you and Luke share at the expense of the oblivious betrayed man? Did you boost his affection for you by belittling or mocking me? What I can't forgive or forget is the message you and the one you regard as your true husband have conveyed to our children, as it will shape their lives indefinitely. I've yet to comprehend the extent of amusement Luke and you derived from manipulating me and our children's lives as if we were mere pawns on a chessboard. The KVOS 12 news reporter aptly captured this when questioning whether you still found amusement in Edward Adams, husband of Grace Adams. I observed Amy, Eric, and April witnessing as you and your lover publicly disclosed your intentions towards me through the media. It was heartbreaking to witness our children as you casually joked about how effortless it would be to bring down the foolish idiot. Our son Eric remarked, "If Mom sees you as nothing but trash to be discarded, what does she really think of us?" I haven't broached the topic of your future relationship with them yet. Currently, it's fair to say it's non-existent due to your and Luke's profound disgust and contempt towards me. At least we're both aware that you derive joy from leaving me branded as a clueless fool for life. Perhaps tonight you and Luke can celebrate your victory with a toast. Ed, update. Grace's hands began to tremble so violently that she dropped the paper. She appeared spiteful. bitter and cruel, showing no concern for her children, husband, or anyone else. It was evident that she cared only about herself and satisfying her carnal desires. Her sobs shattered the room's silence. Ed had a knack for undermining one's credibility without direct condemnation. His observations about their conduct left no room for dispute among readers. In his view, every action she took was to sustain her lifestyle, not out of love. He likely realized that Luke was urging her to leave him and the children before April's conception. Luke's new job forced them to accelerate their plans, originally set for after April's high school graduation. While she wasn't laughing anymore, Ed effectively pointed out that their actions validated his words. Ed believed their disdain for him prompted their attempt to destroy him. Without explicitly stating it, it was a declaration of war. If he went down, he'd take them down with him. Grace resumed reading the divorce petition, finding it utterly devastating. One of the suits accused them of fraud for concealing April's true parentage. The damages sought in the fraud case made her feel sick. If Ed won, both she and Luke would face financial ruin. Ed and his lawyer were proving that they could no longer underestimate him as the fool they believed him to be. Update. Saturday was chaotic for my two eldest children and me. From early morning until around 4 in the afternoon, we had family members dropping by. Grace's parents, her 2 brothers, 1 sister, and their spouses came to offer their support, each bringing one of their favorite dishes to ensure we had something to eat. Even my brother and sister visited from out of town to check up on me. The 3 of us were enveloped in love and support. Each visitor found it difficult to grasp how they could have been deceived by Grace for so long. They all agreed that what had surfaced on social media proved she was trying to destroy me out of hatred. My father-in-law and I went onto the back deck for a moment, where he suggested I let go of whatever was bothering me. He assured me that Cora would keep others away until I felt better and stayed with me until I calmed down. He mentioned plans to revise his will, intending to divide Grace's share among my 3 children. He expressed his disappointment in Grace's actions, stating that he could never forgive her for what she had become. Later, my father called to inform me that April had met the lady and that their meeting went well. Mrs. Smith seemed interested in our family's situation and helped April open up about her feelings. The lawyer obtained the necessary blood sample and had a private chat with my father. They discussed Luke Barrow, and my father shared what we knew about him. It was revealed that Luke's real father was serving a life sentence for a serious crime, and April's arrival had a significant impact on his inheritance. I assured my father that Dale Britton had taken legal measures to keep Luke away from us. Our day had been busy with family members from both sides offering support. My parents were staying as guests at Mrs. Smith's estate, where April was currently with her. They liked Mrs. Smith, and her lawyer mentioned that seeing April had brought a smile to her face after a long time. My mom then spoke to me, mentioning a conversation she had with Mrs. Smith about me and expressing gratitude for how we handled the situation. Mrs. Smith planned to leave everything in a trust for April to be managed by me until she turned 25. Before ending the call, I requested that my parents text me when they were leaving so I could be there when they brought April home. I messaged April, letting her know that we all miss her and sending our love, Dad. Finally, we found time to clean up before David and Cheryl arrived with my car. I apologized to Cheryl for forgetting to return it. Cheryl mentioned that the police chief saw an opportunity to bring down Luke Barrow and that he and Dale were collaborating. Dale had provided some questionable items for the investigators to examine. David shared that the atmosphere at the office was heavy, and everyone was upset upon his return. He informed them generally that some of them had been aware of the situation for most of the week and were offering assistance where possible. I commented that it had been an emotional roller coaster since Thursday night, and that the kids were still struggling at times, so I planned to take Monday off too. Cheryl inquired if I had heard from Grace, to which I responded that I hadn't since Thursday night. I speculated that Luke and she were probably busy moving on with their lives, as they had publicly made it clear how they saw us. Early Sunday morning, my youngest daughter called to ask if it was okay for her and her grandparents to return home late on Monday. I agreed, pending her grandparents' approval. She thanked me for insisting she go and explained that Mrs. Smith had helped her accept that it wasn't her fault because her mother's affair had brought her into the world. She expressed her love for me before hanging up. Amy, Eric, and I observed as my parents arrived in our driveway on Monday evening. They appeared stressed and weary. As soon as my mom stepped out of the car, she rushed into my arms. I must admit, it felt comforting to have my youngest daughter back home. Dad opened the trunk and brought in her suitcase, which Eric promptly took up to her bedroom. The three of them then gathered in the family room so April could share about her new grandmother, allowing my parents and me a chance to catch up. We retreated to the kitchen where I brewed a fresh pot of coffee while my parents shared their impressions of Mrs. Beatrice Smith. "She seemed at peace when we left," Dad remarked. "It was as if she had come to terms with her impending pass-away. Meeting April and seeing her acceptance meant a lot to her." Mom pulled out a legal-size envelope from her purse and handed it to me, explaining, "This was given to me by her lawyer, per Beatrice's instructions." I opened it and found a letter, along with a check for $50,000. The letter was brief and straightforward. The grand lady thanked me for fulfilling her request, mentioning that she had already surpassed her expected lifespan before our contact. DNA had confirmed the biological connection, and she commended me for raising April well. She urged me to use the funds to navigate through the challenging times we were facing and to stay true to my values. I allowed my parents to read it, and we pondered the possibility that we had fulfilled someone's dying wish. Over coffee, I briefed them on everything that had occurred during their absence. I expressed my belief that the worst of the emotional turmoil for our family was behind us, and we could return to our normal routine starting the next day. The remainder of the week proceeded relatively smoothly, all things considered. Grace attempted to reach out to each of our children by phone, but was met with rejection. Meanwhile, the corporate headquarters was pleased that I was no longer managing the sales meetings and began the search for a new sales manager for the first time in a decade. As I sat in my office reviewing monthly sales figures, Kathy entered, expressing concern about trouble brewing. I inquired about the issue, and she informed me that my recent letter to Grace had been posted online on the Southeastern Missouri newspaper's website. We quickly accessed the website's Speak Out section and found the letter. Kathy read it aloud, and I acknowledged that I had written it in a moment of emotional distress, wondering if I had been too harsh. Kathy disagreed, stating that the letter simply stated the reality of Grace's long-term behavior in a direct manner. She pointed out that either of them could have ended the affair and come clean, but Luke had enjoyed the benefits without bearing the costs. We discussed how rare it was for society to witness the consequences of someone's actions on a family in such a public manner. Kathy remarked that, as someone who had experienced divorce, it served as a stark reminder of the pain and suffering endured before finding solace. I then mentioned a comment on the website from a longtime feminist, highlighting how Grace and Luke's actions had tarnished the movement for equality and empowerment. Later, Grace and Luke sat at Charlie's Bar and Grill for dinner. Despite it typically being bustling on Friday nights, the place was unusually empty, with vacant tables surrounding them. When they inquired with the waitress, she explained that people were waiting but refused to be seen sitting near them in public, likely because they had read my recent letter to Grace on the newspaper's website. They swiftly requested the bill and departed, realizing they needed to lay low in public for the foreseeable future. Both were grappling with the reality that their actions had significantly restricted their social circle. As they exited, Grace spotted her parents seated at a nearby table, waiting for their order. She approached them, with Luke trailing behind. Upon hearing her voice, her father addressed them coldly. "Mr. Barrow, I suggest you remove your mistress from here and allow my wife and me to enjoy our meal in peace." Grace left the restaurant in tears, finally comprehending that there was no turning back once you crossed a certain line. She realized she would live with the consequences of her and Luke's actions for the rest of her life. Returning to Luke's place, they visited the website and saw firsthand the public's overwhelming disdain for both of them. Update. I sat in the passenger seat of my car observing April drive. We departed this morning for Wichita, Kansas upon learning of her grandmother Beatrice's passing. Heading to the airport to catch the private plane provided by the estate, April was deeply affected, having grown close to her grandmother through their frequent phone calls. Amy and Eric had been a tremendous help, bringing the four of us closer together. They were both urging me to start dating again, but I've been hesitant. Once bitten, twice shy. Meanwhile, Luke and Grace had relocated to St. Louis. Luke was allowed to start his job early by the feds, with the county eager to rid itself of him once he repaid over $45,000 in questionable expenses. They now resided in a two-bedroom rented apartment, preparing for the possibility of bankruptcy due to an impending civil lawsuit. According to Missouri bankruptcy laws, they could retain only $10,000 each in equity. Our divorce had been finalized according to state law, with Grace obligated to provide child support for our kids while they were in school and cover 50% of their living expenses if they resided on campus. The civil trial for fraud was set to begin in 2 weeks. My kids still refused to speak to their mother, and neither did her side of the family. She had learned the hard way that people will only tolerate so much before walking away forever. April had to endure a meeting arranged by the state's child services with her biological father, which did not go well. She informed him, in the presence of child services representatives, that both he and her mother were dead to her. We attended her grandmother's funeral, after which the lawyer disclosed the substantial inheritance left to us. Overwhelmed, April and I decided to sell her grandmother's home and its contents, except for personal jewelry and a few photos that April wanted. Upon returning home as the school year ended, I prepared for the first day of court on Wednesday when April entered the den. April asked if I could arrange a meeting with Luke, her mom, their lawyers, and Dale on Tuesday, expressing her desire for them to understand the real cost of their actions, an idea suggested by Grandma Beatrice. So I called Dale, and we arranged it. It was a bright, beautiful, sunny day when we sat down with Luke, Grace, and their lawyers. April explained that she requested the meeting to Luke, her biological father, handing him a sealed envelope containing his father's location and his request for him to visit him in jail, disclosing the circumstances of her conception. She revealed that her biological grandmother had left her over $100 million in a trust managed by her father, Edward Adams, until she turned 25, which would have been Luke's if she hadn't been discovered. She warned Luke and Grace of possible legal escalations, urging them to consider mediation before resorting to court. Leaving that meeting, I felt both proud and humbled. My daughter had spoken her truth. Whatever tomorrow held, today I had received the true blessing. Finished.
At around 5:30 p.m. on Sunday, Beverly entered through the front door, tossed her purse and keys onto the nightstand, and made her way down the hallway to the master bedroom. I'm unsure if she noticed me sitting in the office, but it didn't really matter. Over the past few years, I've practically become invisible to her. Approaching her, I retrieved her set of keys, took my spare keys from her, and then rummaged through her purse. I removed her cell phone and wallet, extracting all the cash and credit cards from my wallet and stashing the loot in my pocket, just to be safe. I also grabbed her driver's license before returning to my spot in the office. 15 minutes later, Bev emerged from the hall, looking well-dressed, and spotted me. As she slung her purse over her shoulder and grabbed her keys, she remarked, "I'm meeting some girls from work. Don't wait up." "No, you're not going out with girls from work," I protested. "Jack, you should know by now. You don't control me. I'll do as I please," she retorted. "I didn't say you couldn't hang out with girls from work. I said you're not going to. You're going to see your boyfriend, so don't lie to me," I stated. Beverly stood silently for a moment before boldly entering the office and confronting me. "All right, Jack, you know I'd prefer to handle this differently, but let's end it here. You have 2 options. Either salvage what's left of this marriage by granting me some freedom, or face divorce and be cut out of my life." "What's it going to be?" she challenged. "I'll take door number 3, I replied with a smirk. "Don't be childish. There's no door number 3. Either accept that I have a lover now, a real man, or brace yourself for the consequences," Beverly warned. I stood up, walked over to Bev, and pushed her against the wall, removing the engagement ring and wedding rings from her left hand. With my face close to hers and a fierce glare in my eyes, I whispered angrily, "Here's your door number 3. It's my front door. When you leave through it, It'll be the last time you walk out with anything and never return. You won't get another penny of my money. You'll lose your husband, your daughter, your house, your money, your car, and your job eventually." "You're living in a fantasy, Jack," she muttered nervously. "My lawyer will destroy you tomorrow. I'll send the divorce papers to your workplace. If you damage me, you'll suffer more than I will." I pulled her away from the wall and dragged her toward the front door, her heels causing her to stumble as she screamed incoherently. Bev struggled to maintain her balance, her composure shattered. Throughout our marriage, I had never laid a hand on her, and she didn't know how to react. As she began to regain her senses in the front yard, I shut the door and locked it, the lock already replaced earlier in the day. Earlier, as Bev left, I made the first of 2 calls. I dialed my 19-year-old daughter's number at college. "Hey, it's Dad. Our situation with your mom has hit a crucial point. Looks like she'll be moving in with her boyfriend, and I need to talk to you about it. Just so you know, I've got our last conversation and tons of past arguments recorded. You can listen to them, so you know the truth when she tries to twist things and blame me, which she probably will. Truth is, your mom's been cheating. Not sure how many times, but she's chosen to leave us for this guy. I'll explain more soon, but her boyfriend seems pretty sketchy, so be cautious in your relationship with her." I approached Patty, asking her to return home for the weekend. My intention was to have a conversation and offer her the chance to listen to some tapes if she desired. Thankfully, Patty agreed to come home on Friday. After sorting that out, I reached out to Martha, our neighbor down the block. "Martha, it's Jack," I said over the phone. "If the offer's still good, I'd like to take you up on it. Could you come over in about an hour?" I kept my explanation brief. I felt it was necessary to confide in Martha. Bev and I had met young, married, and soon had Patty. Things seemed good at the start, but Bev's demeanor changed rapidly. She became grumpy, manipulative, and controlling. I tried my best to keep the peace and make her happy, but it only seemed to make things worse. Looking back, I realized I contributed to my own suffering by constantly trying to please her. Now in our 40s, our lives were a mess. It wasn't long before I discovered Bev's affair with a man named Sylvester, known as Sly, who had a violent past. The realization that our marriage was beyond repair brought me a sense of relief, and I began planning my next steps. "I've heard stories where the husband takes half the money," I continued, "but not me. I took every penny I could find, including all the cash in the house. I changed the locks and planned to provoke Bev as much as possible. I knew her well enough to anticipate her reactions. She's dangerous in many ways, but this time she'd be a danger to herself, too. In fact, my planning had started long before I discovered Bev's affair. For years I had been discreetly recording our arguments. Bev thought the device I always carried with me was a simple MP3 player, but in reality, I was building a library of her outbursts to document her behavior. I knew no one would believe my stories unless I had proof, as she only mistreated me behind closed doors. I wanted to be able to share my experiences with everyone, including Patty, to reveal Bev's true nature. On the Monday following our Sunday argument, I hosted a gathering in the company break room. A prominent banner declared "Happy Divorce" overhead. With cake and ice cream at the ready, I eagerly anticipated the arrival of the process server. Fortunately, it was a pleasantly plump girl handling the task. Numerous photos were snapped as my co-workers and I celebrated the receipt of our divorce papers. I even took a picture while accepting the papers, planting a kiss on the server girl's cheek as she sported a festive hat. In another snapshot, I playfully fed her cake, both of us grinning. After the festivities, I emailed the photos to Bev, along with others from the party. Among them were shots of myself and Martha, my roommate, lounging in bed with sheets drawn up, smiling broadly. I hoped Bev would notice her wedding rings adorning Martha's left hand resting on my chest. An hour later, I received an angry call. "You scoundrel! My lawyer will tear you apart after seeing these photos. What a foolish move." "Hardly, Bev. There's nothing inappropriate in these images. No nudity, just pranks between neighbors. Just light-hearted pictures," I countered. "We'll address this later, Jack. I'll swing by the house this evening to retrieve some belongings. It might be best if you're not there. If I'm absent, you won't gain entry. All locks have been changed. If you need anything, be there well before 6:45. Martha and I have plans at 7 o'clock, and I'd rather not be late." Last night marked the most satisfying closeness I've experienced. and tonight promises to be even better. With that, I ended the call and ignored her subsequent 5 attempts. While I haven't answered all her calls since, I have listened to every message. Unlike other men in similar situations, there was a good chance Bev might slip up or accidentally reveal a secret in her angry messages. And indeed, she did divulge herself several times in the following weeks. At 4:30 that day, I drove to Bev's workplace parking lot, aiming to arrive before the evening rush. Confirming the absence of security cameras, what I had to do would be swift. Pulling up beside Bev's car, I circled around her, using wire cutters to sever the valve stems on all her tires. Oh, she'd certainly be enraged. And there'd be no fixing them in time to make it home by 6:45. However, it was around 6:35 when she appeared. Evidently, she'd been out with someone, desperate to return home. Having seen receipts for clothing she hadn't brought home, I knew she must have had plenty stashed at her lover's. She must have wanted something else. Slipping out the back door, I hurried to Martha's house, leaving Bev pounding on the front door and shouting. Upon my return that evening, I found my front window shattered, blood splattered around it. After reviewing the porch security footage, I called the police. The video depicted Bev smashing the window with a tire iron, her threats to harm me echoing clear. Unfortunately for her, the lock I'd installed required a key from both sides. As she recoiled, she sliced her forearm deeply, inciting more screams and threats. I promptly reported the incident, and an officer guided me through filing a restraining order. The next morning, Bev was served with papers forbidding her from coming within 500 feet of me or our home. To say she was livid would be an understatement. "What in the world are you doing, idiot?" kicked off her next call, filled with fury and renewed threats. I meticulously recorded the entire conversation. A few hours later, after she had calmed down a bit, she called again. This time, she mentioned sending her friend Lindsay to retrieve some of her belongings that evening. What could she be so desperate to retrieve from the house, I wondered. Suspicions brewing, I agreed to meet Lindsay at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday. To prepare, I left work a bit early to set up a video camera in my bedroom, with a monitor discreetly installed in my office. Lindsay arrived promptly, and I greeted her warmly. While she packed some clothes into 2 black plastic trash bags, I sat on the bed, observing. Lindsay looked at me nervously, and then requested water from the kitchen. I smiled and left. Upon glancing at the monitor, I noticed Lindsay pulling a shoebox from her closet and placing it into a bag nearby. She then resumed selecting clothes. Upon her return with water, I observed her continuing to pack. She declared that it should suffice, and requested me to take one bag while she took the other, noting that the one she held seemed heavier. I offered to assist Lindsay, but she declined, insisting she was fine and asking me to grab another bag. As she began to fidget and move towards the door with her package, I questioned if there was anything in the package I should be aware of. I grasped her wrist and opened the package, to which she responded anxiously, explaining that it contained clothes and items that Bev needed. Realizing her lie, I confronted Lindsay about the odor emanating from the box, and upon opening it, I found stacks of worn $50 and $100 bills. Accusing her of attempting to steal from me, I rose to my feet and escorted her towards the exit and down the hallway. Lindsay claimed that the money belonged to Bev and that she was merely sent to collect it, denying any intention of theft. However, I pointed out that she came to my house supposedly for clothes, but was leaving with a box of money, which, in my view, constituted theft. Threatening to call the police, I insisted that she prepare to be arrested for robbery. In response, Lindsay pleaded with me not to involve the authorities, citing her children and husband. I seated her on the couch and expressed my disappointment, stating that she would never be welcome in my house again. Despite her protests and tears, I made it clear that if she wished to make amends for her wrongdoing, she had only one chance. "You'll leave this house and inform Bev that I caught you stealing. Then you'll report everything you hear or see to me, especially regarding our divorce or her relationship with Sly. You won't divulge anything about our arrangement. Bev made a terrible mistake getting involved with this loser, and you'll ultimately help her leave him." I informed Lindsay that if she cooperated with me, I had the entire incident on video, and I could call the police and file a report against her at any time. Reluctantly, Lindsay agreed to act as my informant. As soon as she departed, I took the box of money and walked to Martha's house at the end of the block. She agreed to conceal it for me until I could safely stash it somewhere beyond Bev's reach. I knew the likely source of the money. Bev's Aunt Mabel, known for her stinginess, passed away a few months ago, leaving Bev as her sole heir. While I knew Aunt Mabel had left Bev a small rural cottage, there was never any mention of money. It seemed that when Bev inspected the cabin after the will reading, she stumbled upon her aunt's hidden cash. When my wife Bev called, enraged and screaming, I recorded the conversation cautiously. "This money is mine, Jack! I want my damn money!" she yelled. "Bev, I'm not sure what you're talking about. I caught Lindsay trying to pilfer money from my nightstand. This is mine." "You know exactly what I'm referring to. The money in the shoebox is mine. It's from Aunt Mabel," I retorted. "Maybe Lindsay found some money in a shoebox, but if so, she likely took it and kept it for herself. I don't have it. And if you had money here unknown to me, you didn't report it on your taxes last year. I've reviewed our tax returns. You're welcome to involve the police, and then we'll inform the IRS about this money, letting them handle your tax evasion," she snapped before hanging up. I felt a need for retaliation. I'd pushed Bev's buttons too hard for her to simply disappear. Restricted by a restraining order from leaving her house, I anticipated she might retaliate against me through my car, considering I'd previously vandalized hers. Hence, I had a dashboard-mounted camera installed, but it wasn't sufficient. If she chose that route, I wanted clear footage. Thus, when I parked in front of the garage on Wednesday morning, I set up an exterior camera. Discreetly positioned, it streamed video to my desk, accessible an hour before lunch. I watched on my laptop as Bev parked behind my car, got out, and began smashing it with a hammer, shattering windows and denting panels. The sight of her breaking the windshield and yelling sent a shiver down my spine. I dialed emergency, and a police car awaited her as she left the driveway. Presenting the video evidence of my damaged Toyota, the authorities arrested Bev, recognizing her actions as a criminal offense. The resisting arrest charge was an added bonus. As she was led away, her pleading eyes met my silent stare. Bev's divorce lawyer phoned me Wednesday, notifying me of a court hearing regarding access to the money withdrawn from our joint accounts. Set for Thursday at 10 a.m., I arrived at 9:50, wondering if Bev had posted bail. She entered with her lawyer, wearing a smug expression. Addressing the judge, her lawyer asserted, "Your Honor, my client was denied access to the shared bank accounts. After she filed for divorce, her husband illicitly emptied them. We're requesting a 50-50 split. Mr. Reynolds, would you like to address the court?" "Yes, Your Honor. My wife, who has been unfaithful, has been withdrawing her own funds from our joint accounts for months. The money I withdrew was fair compensation since I cover rent and bills. She abandoned our marriage to be with her affair partner." Bev rose, objecting. "That's untrue. He drained our savings and checking accounts, leaving me with nothing." Her lawyer intervened, guiding her back to her seat for a brief conference while I presented documents to the judge. "Your Honor, these bank statements cover last year. You'll see highlighted amounts, including Bev's salary, up until a few months ago, along with periodic bonuses. Then, about 6 months ago, her deposits ceased, including bonuses. I have a recorded conversation with her HR confirming her direct deposit switch to her personal account. The total amount diverted from our joint account is significant. It's evident my unfaithful wife possesses substantial wealth obtained from our marriage." The judge scrutinized the bank statements and then addressed Beverly. "Do you have any response, Miss Reynolds?" Her lawyer rose cautiously, stating, "Your Honor, even if my client has personal funds, Mr. Reynolds is still obligated to provide her with her fair share." "Well, Counselor, I don't appreciate deceit. Miss Reynolds claimed she was destitute, yet she entered with you. It's clear she was financially supported from marital assets, deceiving her husband and the court. Since Mr. Reynolds covers expenses from his own funds, there's no reason to alter the financial arrangements. Property division will be addressed in the final divorce decree. Case closed." As I left, Bev confronted me in the hallway. I began noting her threats. "Bev, you're violating the restraining order. I'll contact the police if you don't leave. By the way, how was jail? Ready for more time there? You're facing criminal charges." Though she seemed ready to retaliate, I continued toward the exit. She stood, fists clenched, face flushed. Later that evening, I went to a different bar where I had previously encountered an intriguing man named Zeke. Fortunately, he was there. I greeted him and asked if he remembered me, to which he replied that my name wasn't important. Zeke then mentioned that he still had the beat-up car. Expressing his disdain for the car, he explained that his wife had taken the good one when she left with her new lover. He complained about the broken air conditioning and his inability to afford a replacement. I inquired about his car insurance and suggested that if he followed my advice, I might be able to help him get something better. Zeke responded by saying he was listening. Let's imagine you're driving down 38th Street and suddenly a gray cat dashes out in front of you. Naturally, you hit the brakes, and there's a chance the lady behind you might rear-end your lousy car at speeds over 15 miles per hour. Your car could end up totaled, but as long as you're firmly against the headrest with your seatbelt on, you should be okay. Insurance will take care of the damages. Plus, you could at least afford a car with air conditioning. But what if the lady who hits me gets injured? I can't do that to her. Well, I can assure you she'll be an unfaithful wife, and there won't be anyone else in her car if you follow my instructions. What do you think about that? Oh man, that would be great. I can't stand cheaters. And I definitely need to get rid of this car. Park at the corner of 38th and Lessing by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Keep an eye out for a blue Miata leaving the parking lot and heading your way. Pull out in front of it. She doesn't like passing other cars, so drive a block or so until she's tailing you. Then you'll spot a cat darting across the road. Get ready and hit the brakes hard. Just stay in the car. Afterward, dial emergency and mention a possible neck injury. And by the way, we've never met. I won't be back in this bar, and we don't know each other. Dude, I'm colder than the AC in your new car. On Friday, I left work early to meet my daughter at home. As planned, she finished her classes and returned on Sunday evening. We discussed the divorce situation, and I played her a recording of my conversation with her mother about door number 3. Patty was stunned by her mother's ruthless tone and demands. Then, I shared recordings from the past 2 years, revealing a side of Bev she'd never known. What do you know about the guy Mom's with? Dad? I know he's trouble, and I want you to steer clear of him. If you must meet your mom, make sure it's in a public place. I don't know what he's capable of to get to me. In any case, always have something to protect yourself if there's even a hint he might be around. Patty, I knew your mom and I had our issues, but I never realized the extent of it. What went wrong between us? This was a question I had anticipated, so I proceeded to offer a condensed version of my viewpoint to Patty. I explained to her that her mother and I had fundamentally different perspectives on marriage. After reflecting on the matter, I conveyed to Patty that I had identified 4 main ways power could be distributed in a relationship. There are instances when neither party takes the lead, resulting in a situation where everything drifts aimlessly like a ship without a rudder. Alternatively, both partners may assume responsibility, leading to constant battles over dominance, or a division of control over different aspects of the relationship. Some couples might even share responsibility equally, which was my expectation going into our relationship. However, things didn't pan out as expected. Another scenario arises when the man assumes full control. While such an arrangement may function under specific circumstances, modern perceptions often view such paternalistic relationships as oppressive to women. Yet, if a man wholeheartedly devotes himself to his wife, it can resemble a fairy tale romance, offering a fulfilling life to a wife with the right temperament, free from the burden of difficult decisions. Alternatively, it could mirror your maternal grandparents' dynamic, where your grandmother was passive and your grandfather was dominant and at times harsh. Your mother likely grew up witnessing this and expected a similar power dynamic in our relationship. Consequently, when I attempted to share equal footing with her, she perceived it as a sign of weakness on my part, leading to increasing disrespect despite my efforts to please her. This leads me to the final scenario, a relationship where the wife dominates. It seems your mom opted to take charge. When I failed to meet her standards of a good person, she turned cruel. She dictated which projects should be completed and insisted they meet her standards. Countless times, she initiated family projects only to micromanage every detail, leaving many unfinished because I couldn't tolerate feeling emasculated in my own home. She even instructed me on how to hold tools while working, making it unbearable. In such cases, when the wife dominates, it goes against human nature. I don't comprehend how this dynamic can function. While a husband may remain loving and affectionate, the wife loses respect for him as she exerts control. I believe this dynamic has manifested in our relationship. As I began to resist, Beverly perceived it as a lack of responsibility on my part. By then, she already viewed me as weak. When I refused to be bossed around, she saw me as a rebellious child. I doubt I'll ever regain her respect. This divorce may be my final opportunity to earn it back. I explained to Patty that she would understand my actions when she realized how difficult it was to assert my intolerance for her mother's lifestyle. I advised her that when making significant decisions in her future relationships, such as starting a family or choosing careers and homes, it was crucial for mutual respect to prevail. I emphasized the importance of both Patty and her partner understanding what to expect to avoid the unhappy situation Beverly and I found ourselves in. In response, Patty assured me that she would keep my advice in mind and promised to consider it. Shortly after, the phone rang. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Memorial Hospital. Your wife was in a car accident. She's stable and not severely injured, but she'll be with us, at least for the night." Patty and I drove to the hospital, and I allowed her to enter the room first. She didn't stay long, and afterward, I requested to speak with Bev alone. When she emerged, wearing a gloomy expression, I suspected Patty had spoken harshly to her. "God, you look terrible, Bev," I remarked with a slight grin. "What a dreadful week, huh? First, you lose your marriage, husband, and home. Then you get served with a restraining order and arrested for a felony. Next, you lose some of your expected money, and now your car is totaled, and you're here in the hospital with a broken wrist and a bruised face from the airbag. Seems like this divorce is turning out much better for me." "Freak you," she retorted. "Oh, Bev, where's your old sly charm? Has he come to visit yet? Don't worry, he's probably busy with one of his other 2 women right now." Her complexion turned pale. "You probably didn't know about the others when you started all this, did you? Well, looks like you know now. I wonder how long it will be before he wants you to serve one of them. I never thought of you as a people pleaser, but that might be a good skill to learn considering how much you'll need it in prison." "I'm not going to jail. My lawyer will get these false charges dropped." "Really? You crash my car and threaten my health, and you think you'll get off easy? Because when I spoke to the DA, he made it clear he's gunning for you. He's got photographic evidence and an upcoming election to win. Now he's aiming to look like a hero cracking down on crime. I believe he'll push for the maximum penalty." She simply sat there, staring at me. "By the way, did you decide which car insurance company to contact?" I asked. "Car insurance? What are you talking about? We still have the same old." "Wait, so you didn't bother getting insurance this week when you filed for divorce?" "I removed your car from my insurance. You must have known about this, considering you insisted on having only your name on your Miata. If you didn't get insurance this week, you're in serious trouble. You'll face fines, towing costs, and 3 years of payments. That Miata may end up in a junkyard while you're still paying for it. And since you won't have a job after your felony conviction, you may not need another car. Plus, you'll likely have to cover the medical bills for the guy you hit, and his insurance company will demand payment for the damages. Damn it. But at least you have your own medical insurance, right?" "I'm on yours." No, I removed you from my health insurance on Monday. Didn't you take care of that too?" "Baby, you're in big trouble. The ambulance ride, ER visit, x-rays, doctor's fees, cast for your arm, hospital stay, and follow-up care will cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Hey, speaking of medicine, the other day, I was reminiscing about when you fell ill a couple of years back. Remember? I took a week off to care for you. I held your head while you were vomiting and cleaned up everything afterward. When you couldn't make it to the bathroom in time, I called the doctor and went to the pharmacy to get you medicine. Then, a week later when you felt better, you started scolding me again, insulting me, and calling me names. I wonder how well old Sly will take care of you next time you're sick. Well, it's time for me to call Sly now that you think he's done with his other woman. I wish you a good life." As I left, Beverly sat there crying, but I didn't care anymore. Everything went on as usual for some time. I kept in touch with Lindsay occasionally. She started worrying about Sly's influence over Bev, and gradually, Lindsay distanced herself from her. Then one evening, as I returned home and headed to my front door, I was attacked on the lawn. I was cautious about possible attacks, but I didn't see this one coming. A guy wearing a ski mask knocked the wind out of me, twisted my arm behind my back, and demanded I give him the box of money and tell the DA to drop the charges. I felt helpless, but still had the car alarm remote in my hand. I pressed the panic button, setting off the alarm. Sly got furious, hit me again, and then ran off quickly as the neighbor's porch lights turned on and people started looking out. I yelled for someone to call emergency, and a police officer arrived a few minutes later. I wasn't injured enough for an ambulance, and Sly was long gone. None of my neighbors could identify him, so he escaped punishment for the attack. An even bigger shock came when I told my daughter about it the next day. "Dad, I didn't want to tell you, but I also had an encounter with Sly. Mom called me to talk. I agreed, but insisted we meet away from his apartment. She asked me to pick her up, but when I arrived, she sat me down on their couch. Then Sly came out and talked to me. He said since Mom wasn't coping well with her injuries in bed, I would have to tend to his needs. He claimed she owed him, and I would have to pay for it. I looked at my mother, and she just stared at the floor without saying anything. Sly told me to make her comply. Mom looked at me and pleaded, saying, 'Please, baby, stay with him. It won't be that bad, and I really need you to do this for me.' He then approached me, grabbed my wrist, and tried to force me to stand up, saying we were going to the bedroom. With my right hand on the pepper spray in my purse, I sprayed it in his face when he pulled me away. He screamed, grabbed his face, and I grabbed my purse, attempting to pull my mother out the door, but she resisted and went toward him. I yelled at her to come with me, but she chose to assist him in the bathroom, so I left. I can't believe my own mom tried to set me up with that idiot. I don't know if I can ever forgive her for this." I was boiling with anger, like any father in my situation. Contemplating my Beretta in the bedroom, I almost reached for it. After a while, my daughter reassured me, confirming she wasn't damaged, and advised me to consider the future. I made Patty promise not to walk alone until after the trial, and always to have protection with her. She agreed to only date fellow students and never be alone in public. Gradually, I regained my composure. Sly urged me to talk to the DA, but he didn't anticipate the conversation I had. I presented a recording of my daughter discussing Sly and reminded him of Sly's attack on me. The DA inquired if I'd consider leniency toward Bev or dropping the charges. Absolutely not. I insisted on seeking the maximum penalty. Bev is under the control of this manipulative person, and separating them is the only way to help her. A stint in prison might straighten her out. The district attorney agreed, and the trial proceeded. I felt fairly confident at home and work, but there were moments of vulnerability, especially when entering or leaving the garage. However, I was cautious during my commute. Our house sits about 10 miles down the ranch road, with only one turnoff in the next 15 miles. I was well aware of other potential danger zones. During the long drive home, I always had my Beretta with me. One evening, a few days before Bev's trial, I noticed headlights of a pickup truck behind me about 2 miles from home, sending shivers down my spine. Soon, it was tailgating me aggressively, just 20 feet from my rear bumper, going 55 miles per hour. I called emergency on my phone and activated the voice recorder. As I accelerated to 70 miles per hour, the pickup kept pace. Frantically, I requested the emergency operator to contact the detective investigating my assault. The truck continued to tail me for another 5 miles as I narrated the situation. With the pistol lying next to me, I prepared for potential danger. As I approached a bridge spanning a small creek bed, I suspected the driver would attempt to force me off the road. Approaching the bridge, about 100 yards away, the pickup accelerated, indicating its intent to force me off the road. I briefly glimpsed Bev's face in the passenger seat as it pulled up beside me. I braked sharply, causing the car to skid, but maintaining control. Although the truck stopped ahead of me, my quick braking prevented a collision. My car slid to a halt by the roadside, its rear resting on a slope leading down to the creek bed. Exiting the car, I grabbed my weapon, phone, and recorder, descending the steep gravel slope beneath the bridge. As I descended, I noticed the pickup's brake lights illuminate. Navigating in the darkness, I cautiously felt my way under the bridge. Despite the risk of encountering a rattlesnake, I was more concerned about other dangers. Breathing heavily, I sought a secure hiding spot, eventually stopping and tilting the Beretta. I waited anxiously, but heard nothing for a while. Cell phone contact with emergency was lost. Attempting to redial in the dark proved futile due to poor signal reception. I was stuck, uncertain if help was on the way. At least the ominous growl of the pickup truck overhead was absent. I resolved to remain stationary, prepared to spend the night there if necessary. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 5 or 10 minutes before I heard a siren in the distance, approaching from the same direction as me. Realizing they were far behind, I began walking up the hill, leaving the Beretta under the bridge. Raising my hands as I approached the road, I implored the arriving police not to shoot. Observing 2 cars parked across the road, blocking both lanes, I heard sirens from the other side and saw a pickup truck heading back to the bridge. I stumbled and fell into the mud. While my view was limited, I heard the pickup screech to a stop, and officers ordered the driver to exit and lie on the ground. Other police cars following the pickup stopped behind it. Soon, Bev and Sly were in custody on attempted slaughter charges. Though deeply worried, I returned home, showered, and attempted to sleep to no avail. When your spouse faces multiple felonies, divorce appears remarkably straightforward. The judge expressed sympathy, and Bev and her lawyer offered little resistance. Desperate to minimize her prison sentence, Bev proposed conceding virtually everything in the divorce for assistance in reducing her punishment. During the sentencing hearing, I testified to Bev's prior virtues before falling under Sly's influence. I expressed a willingness to forgive her over time for attempting to end my life. Omitting her likely infidelity and years of torment, I could not interpret her facial expression in court, nor did I speak to her directly. Ultimately, Sly received a lengthy prison sentence. I hope he shares a cell with a burly inmate named Bubba, who finds him particularly appealing. The judge showed more leniency towards Bev, but she won't be eligible for parole for at least 3 years. So it's been approximately 4 years since Bev was incarcerated. The DA's office informed me that she was granted parole about a year ago. I kept waiting to hear from her, knowing she's not in contact with Patty. Revenge seemed promising, but it didn't live up to expectations. I found myself unable to stop dwelling on everything that had unfolded. So, unexpectedly, I reached out to my ex-wife. "Bev, this is Jack. I have something of yours, and I want it back." I phoned the rehab center where Bev resided now. For a few moments, there was no response. "Beverly, I want to give you a shoebox. Can you hear me? Can we arrange to meet so I can return it to you?" I thought she might hang up, but finally she responded, "Where? When? I don't care." We agreed to meet at a neutral location, like a restaurant, or she could come to my house. I suggested Sunday. "Are you free on Sunday?" After a brief silence, she replied, "I'll be there on Sunday." At 2 p.m., the phone rang. How does one prepare to confront their ex-wife, the mother of their child, the woman who attempted to eliminate them, and a convicted felon? I made lemonade and cookies. When Bev arrived, neither of us attempted to shake hands or hug. We exchanged greetings, and I motioned for her to enter the office. Her hair was much shorter than before, and her eyes were stern. She wasn't wearing much, if any, makeup now. At 50 years old, she looked 65. There were drinks, cookies, and a shoebox on the coffee table. She sat down opposite the sofa, and I offered her soft drinks, which she refused. Did she really suspect that I would try to poison her? Well, if you don't want lemonade and cookies, then I suppose all you need is the shoebox and whatever else we have to say to each other. What's the catch, Jack? What do you want instead? Is there anything left? She remained very suspicious. There's no trick, Bev. It's all there, except for a few thousand that I contributed with an equal amount of my own money and gave to Patty as a down payment for her house when she got married. If you wish, she can start returning your share at your convenience. I simply gave her my portion. I could see from Bev's expression that she didn't know Patty was married. Patty has been married for 2 years, and you're already a grandmother. I sensed the tension in her eyes as she struggled with her emotions. The little girl's name is Shannon Beverly Evans. Shannon is the name of her other grandmother. Bev's eyes filled with tears despite her best efforts. Bev, I know you haven't spoken to Patty in a while. There must be a way for you to reconnect. If you want, I can facilitate that. Beverly nodded, tears now streaming down her cheeks. I reached for the box of tissues I had placed on the coffee table. I'll give you the abridged version of our story if you're not ready to leave just yet, I said gently. She wiped tears from her cheek and tried to compose herself. Patty found a great guy named Stan Evans. He's into computers and networks. They seem to click really well. She's a fantastic mom, and they're deeply devoted to each other. Martha and I didn't last long. She's too young for me, and she just needed me temporarily until she could get her life back on track. She found someone else and moved on. I date occasionally, but I end things if it gets too serious. I'm better off solo. I'll stick to being single." There was silence for a while. "I'm going to share some thoughts, mainly for my own benefit, but maybe you can glean something useful from them too. I hope so. I couldn't wait to see you in prison. I loathed you and wished you dead many times, but when they locked you up, my feelings started to shift. I found I couldn't revel in my victory anymore, so I let go of my hatred for you, even though you never asked for it. I forgave you because I know you're not entirely to blame. I couldn't understand you until it was too late, and we stopped communicating. We were just bickering." Beverly composed herself and looked up from the floor. She gave me a lost look but remained silent. "That's the truth, succinctly and plainly. If you have nothing more to say, and if you're not hungry, I won't keep you any longer. You probably have important things to attend to." She stood up and took the box as she headed toward the front door. For the first time since I pushed her away all those years ago, I called out to her, "Beverly, it doesn't matter now, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I'm curious. Throughout our time together, especially on that last day you were here, it was clear that you saw me as weak. Do you still think I'm a pushover, Bev?" She paused with her hand on the doorknob and glanced back at me. She expressed her feelings bitterly, stating that she hated me and believed I had been cruel, asserting that I had ruined her life. After a moment of pause, she added that she didn't consider me to be a pushover. Following this statement, she disappeared from my life permanently. Most individuals lack a true understanding of how lengthy eternity endures, often conflating it with the idea of infinity. However, my personal experience revealed that eternity spanned precisely 15 years, 2 months, 27 days, and several peculiar hours. It concluded much as it began, with my wife, Tracy, affectionately locking eyes with her partner and sharing a passionate kiss. Except this time, I was this partner for the first time, and the kiss followed my proposal for her to be mine forever on the night I presented the engagement ring. In a different setting, I found myself a mere bystander in a restaurant 2 towns away from our residence, as Tracy and an apparent new lover exchanged adoring glances and leaned in for a passionate kiss. The details of how I ended up in the same restaurant as this couple are irrelevant. Their location, an hour away from our hometown, indicated a deliberate effort to remain discreet. Initially curious, my emotions swiftly shifted from curiosity to shock, disgust, and anger. As the scene unfolded before me, I briefly entertained the thought of confronting them physically. However, I was always taught never to smack a woman, so I sat there in complete astonishment. Since they focused solely on each other, feeling secure that no one who knew them would see, they leisurely enjoyed their meal, occasionally engaging in a kissing game. I ate slowly, had dessert, and observed them throughout. My emotions fluctuated between rage and helplessness. Upon finishing their meal, they stood up, held hands, and left. Seated there in silent rage, I felt like the most ignorant fool. I had been married to Tracy for over 14 years, with 2 exclusive years preceding that. Yet, I never suspected she was switching both ways. She never showed interest in another woman, never dropping hints in any conversation we ever had. I erroneously believed I knew her inside and out, anticipating growing old together. The revelation of her switch-hitting paled in comparison to the anger I felt at her apparent infidelity, regardless of the gender of her partner. She had redirected her love, betraying the commitment we made many years ago. When she accepted my ring, it signified an enduring eternity, seemingly timeless. Who would have thought that some eternities have an expiration date? Settling the bill, I entered the car and drove home slowly. I had much to contemplate. Tracy did not anticipate my early return after the trip, but fortunately, I resolved all issues ahead of schedule. Hence, I headed home on Friday evening instead of Saturday afternoon as initially planned. I had been away since Monday morning, and apart from missing Tracy and the kids, the absence of closeness for more than 3 consecutive days left me with pent-up energy that needed release, at least until I witnessed what unfolded in the restaurant. I was an hour away from our hometown and could have easily driven straight through. However, since I was ahead of schedule, I opted to go out to dinner for a break from driving, and the rest, as they say, is history. Our kids are 12 and 10, old enough to be left alone for the evening if Tracy wanted to go out, which I had no issue with. However, I wondered if they were aware of the situation, since neither had mentioned anything different. Perhaps they were as in the dark as I was, I thought. Regardless, I knew they wouldn't be pleased with what happened next. On the way home, I engaged in the usual self-analysis. What did I do wrong? How long did it last? Etc. At least I didn't have to worry about her lover having a larger manhood than me. Chuckling, I'm talking about myself. Gallows humor. I walked in the door at 9, and Tracy still wasn't home. My daughters Lisa, 12, and Ariel, 10, greeted me happily, but I watched without truly seeing them, nervous and doubtful that I would be home early. The same couldn't be said for Tracy. When Tracy entered about 2 hours later, she must have noticed my car in the garage and freshened up a bit. I observed a shift in her demeanor, appearing less content than in our previous encounters. She inquired about my unexpected presence, expressing concern with her first words. I responded playfully, emphasizing her greeting. Tracy, with a slight twitch in her forehead, mentioned that if she had known I would be home early, she would have prepared a nice dinner. She went on to reveal that she had ordered pizza for the kids, and she and Kate had opted for wine and sandwiches downtown. Tracy, avoiding eye contact, asked if I remembered Kate from my office and if she had mentioned her before. Despite her dishonesty, I replied affirmatively. Tracy then proceeded to sarcastically recall Kate as a blonde with ample chest, remarking on the trail of admirers she left behind. I couldn't help but think that Tracy had the ability to assemble a football team merely by entering a room. This wasn't solely due to her captivating effect on married women. Kate, I mused to myself, possessed the allure of a goddess with her remarkable chest. She was about 26 years old and had started working at the insurance company where Tracy had worked the previous year. The two became instant friends, and apparently, somewhere down the line, at 39 years old, Tracy could still turn more than a few heads. She was also blonde, with a beautiful figure and curves in all the right places. She was only 10 pounds heavier than when we first met, but it was still a great package, and at least until recently, it was exclusively my package. Despite the worried expression on her face, Tracy acted calmly. As for me, I could barely stand on my feet, so I just told her that I was tired and was going to bed. She gave me a quick peck on the lips as I walked past her and headed up the stairs. Perhaps I was mistaken, but I was almost sure that I felt the taste of love-making games on her lips. I went to bed but did not fall asleep. The kids went to bed before me, so when I heard a quiet conversation a few minutes later, I realized Tracy was talking to Kate on the phone. It was a short conversation, and a few minutes later, I heard Tracy getting into the shower in our master bathroom. Either I scared her so much that she quit the game and wasn't as careful as before, or she thought I was dreaming and wouldn't find out about it. My heart sank even lower. Between kid stuff and housework, I didn't have to interact with Tracy too much for the rest of the weekend. She wanted to have a family dinner on Saturday night, but I said I wasn't in the mood and just left the room, effectively ending the conversation. She must have known something was up because I'm rarely rude to her. On Monday morning at work, I requested a day off from my boss due to some personal issues I was facing. Having gone through a divorce about 10 years ago and remarried 5 years ago, John, my boss, had some understanding that something was amiss in the Mason family. Considering the success of my sales trip the previous week, he didn't hesitate when I asked for time off. As I prepared to leave his office, he handed me his business card, revealing it to be that of his divorce lawyer. He conveyed his regret, expressing sorrow for the unexpected turn in my relationship with Tracy. I acknowledged his sentiment, stating that I, too, had envisioned a lasting connection with Tracy. Acting on my boss's suggestion, I sought legal advice 2 days later. Despite my lawyer's potential for a more professional approach, she displayed genuine concern for my emotions and offered gentle guidance. She seemed surprised when I decided against hiring a private investigator to gather concrete evidence of Tracy's infidelity. I detected understanding in her gaze as she pointed out that, in a no-fault state, such evidence might not carry much weight. The primary concern, she noted, could revolve around potential challenges with visitation rights, although she expressed confidence that this would likely not be a significant issue, no matter how hard I tried. Being around Tracy and the girls at home was something I couldn't handle. Tracy likely sensed this, given our minimal communication. I believe the girls sensed something was amiss by our unusual quietness. I gave Tracy numerous chances to talk, but she never seized the opportunity. The situation escalated when Tracy was served at work the following week. Call it petty if you will, but I wanted Tracy to experience even a fraction of the pain I felt. I presume she was served around 11:03 a.m. because my phone started ringing incessantly at 11:05. I ignored all 15 calls from her and several from unfamiliar numbers, suspecting she might be using friends' phones to contact me. Surprisingly, I felt a surge of energy for the first time since discovering her with Kate, and I was having a surprisingly good day. Tracy's car was already in the garage when I arrived at 5:30. She wasted no time acknowledging her presence, expressing her anger about being served in front of friends and colleagues. I remained silent until entering the house and putting down my things. The girls were in the living room, engrossed in what seemed to be a movie on the big screen. I calmly stated that I wanted to ensure she was served alongside her mistress for her own comfort. Tracy's anger disappeared, replaced by tears. I retorted, questioning her knowledge about Kate and remarking on the lack of caution in their actions. I asked her two things: how long and when she had planned to tell me. She responded, admitting it had been about 6 months and insisting they were planning to inform me soon. In less than 30 seconds, Tracy's demeanor shifted from venomous to defeated. She stumbled to the kitchen table and sat down. I walked over to the drinks cabinet, grabbed a bottle of Buffalo Trace bourbon, poured myself a double, and sat across from her. If looks could homicide, she would have perished within the first 2 seconds. I observed her, and she couldn't tear her eyes away from the table. Quietly, I asked how I couldn't have known about her switch hitting after all this time. She responded that she, too, had only recently discovered it about herself. She insisted it wasn't planned, it just happened. Finally, she looked at me and held my gaze, saying that it shouldn't change anything between us. Tracy expressed her continued love for me and the need to explore this new aspect of herself. She asked for my support and more time to explore, stating that it was her turn. I expressed my shock, questioning whether 6 months was insufficient for her exploration. I mentioned that if she truly loved me, she would remember our vows and not entertain the idea of exploring at all. I shared my belief that fidelity transcended gender, and she shouldn't have considered such actions. She countered by suggesting that true love could forgive a mistake, to which I argued that once could be a mistake, but 6 months indicated a conscious decision. I expressed my frustration, emphasizing that love should not give her the license to tear my heart out and jeopardize our family. I asserted that her actions had nothing to do with gender, labeling her self-centered. She retorted, insisting that it had a lot to do with girls, and accused me of being a complainer. I confronted her, accusing her of turning into a piece of garbage before my eyes, and challenged her love for me, claiming she now loved me like a pet rather than a man. I accused her of being in love with the other woman, pointing out that I had fallen to second place. When she denied it, I yelled at her to stop, asserting that I knew what I saw and knew her better than anyone else. She looked guilty, and it dawned on her that I had seen them together. Despite her quick attempt to salvage the situation, I argued that it didn't change the fact that she loved someone else instead of me. I expressed the sentiment that everything might have been different if it were another man. At least then, I could confront him. She asked if we could be civil, to which I responded uncertainly, acknowledging the painful truth that she had fallen in love with a woman who had become her mistress, ultimately stealing my wife. A few months later, I learned that the children knew nothing about Tracy's affair. They thought that Aunt Kate was just a close friend of Mom's. They had both seen the occasional quick kiss and gentle touch. But since Aunt Kate wasn't a man, they didn't think there was anything inappropriate. I found out about this one night when the kids and I went out to dinner, and the kids mentioned that Kate had been spending more time in the house since I moved in. They seemed to have figured out that Aunt Kate was one of the reasons Tracy and I were getting a divorce. Since we live in a no-fault divorce state, our finances were pretty much split down the middle. I had to pay her child support. She got the house until the kids went to college, and of course, I had to pay child support. I moved into an apartment about 15 minutes from my old home. I was completely crushed. Tracy and I kept in touch through the girls. They were involved in all sorts of activities, both in and out of school, and Tracy and I tried our best to show them that we were going to support them as much as possible. I don't know why, but Tracy fought hard with the divorce, and it dragged on for a year before we finally did it. I was polite, nothing more, when I ran into Tracy and Kate at my daughter's parties. As for family events, I was always invited, but knowing that Tracy would be there, I apologized and escaped for forgiveness. I know I was giving up some wonderful family memories, but it took everything I had to keep my composure when she and Kate were around. I did a solo day for the kids to give them birthday and Christmas gifts. As you might expect, each of us retained the friends we had before we got married. Almost all the friends we made after we got married stayed with Tracy. As one of the husbands explained to me, many of them felt awkward around me, given that I had lost my wife to a woman. The consensus seemed to be that I somehow deserved it, and several of our married women friends almost made just that claim. I let them go without a fight because, as the old saying goes, you learn who your real friends are under adverse conditions. By my own choice, I didn't date much for the next few years. My heart certainly wasn't ready for this, and I didn't need much communication. After a year of being alone, I went to the local animal shelter and adopted a German shepherd who was probably about 3 years old. I actually went to the shelter and asked them to show me the 3 dogs that had been there the longest. The one I chose had been there since he was a frisky puppy, but after being rejected repeatedly, he turned into a quiet, reclusive animal with the saddest pair of eyes I've ever seen on an animal. I felt like we were soulmates because we were both rejected. The dog's name was Bob. Not some cute animal name or something named after a cute Disney character, just Bob. Bob caught me, and I caught Bob. The first thing he did when I brought him into my apartment after sniffing around was to climb onto the couch next to me and curl up next to me. He was good with the girls when I had them over on the weekends, but I think Bob liked it best when it was just us guys. He loved to walk or ride with me, and we could talk about almost any topic. Admittedly, Bob was mostly silent during these conversations, but I knew from the look on his face and ears that he was paying attention to everything I said. A few years later, my oldest daughter, Lisa, met a guy from Boston in college and got married. Since I was doing pretty well in my engineering career, I could afford to give her the wedding of her dreams. I couldn't have been more proud of her as I walked her down the aisle. But after the service, I earned a reprimand from her for ruining my one line. I realized this right during the rehearsal, but under the pressure of the real situation, my voice cracked. Coming to my senses, I responded to the question of who was marrying Tracy off with a simple I, instead of the correct her mother and I. I admitted to almost choking on my words. Taking my seat in the front row beside Tracy, she leaned towards me and quietly remarked that it was disgusting, and I knew it. Kate, seated next to Tracy, leaned forward and audaciously glared at me. I discreetly told her to forget it with just my lips, checking if the pastor noticed our exchange. Wedding ceremonies always bring back memories for me, and at first, I looked back on my wedding day fondly. This memory lasted about 30 seconds before I mentally pictured Tracy and Kate together in the restaurant when I found out about them. When I awoke from my reverie, Tracy was looking at me sadly. She blushed and quickly looked away. I guess I wasn't the only one taking a walk down memory lane. Although I didn't try to watch, I noticed that Tracy and Kate seemed to be having a great time together with Lisa and her new husband Jerry and almost everyone else. It was then that I noticed I was one of the few single people over 50 in the room. Feeling sorry for myself, I went to the open bar and ordered a shot of 18-year-old Irish whiskey. Taking my glass, I sat down at my table and quietly patted myself on the back for hosting such a grand event. 3 years later, I was about to play the father of the bride again when my youngest, Ariel, had her beau walk her down the aisle. This time, I decided not to go it alone and finally made a concerted effort to meet people. Returning home from a 3-day trip out of state 3 weeks later, I stopped at a small bar restaurant about an hour from my apartment. Though I usually avoid such bars due to my dislike of country western music, they were advertising pork BBQ, so I had to stop. The food was great, and as the DJ started playing music around 8 p.m., I looked around in case there might be someone worth chatting with, so to speak. Just then, A 30-year-old black woman with the face of an angel walked through the door. She was absolutely gorgeous, and I wondered why an unmarried young black woman was at the bar at this time. On the other hand, there I was, the lonely old white guy. I knew she was probably too young for me, but damn it. I motioned to the bartender to put everything she drank on my tab. He told her that her drink was paid for and gestured in my direction. She walked over to my table to thank me, and I invited her to sit down. To my surprise, she sat down next to me and introduced herself as Jade. During a pleasant evening, she suggested going to her place, catching me off guard. Without hesitation, we headed towards the door when a man in a cowboy hat approached Jade and lightly kissed her cheek. I halted abruptly, and Jade reassured me, introducing him as her husband, Fred. She asked if he could join and have a look, to which Fred grinned and mentioned their involvement. I expressed my discomfort, stating there was something wrong with the situation and the messed-up generation. I raised my hands, signaling them to stop, and left alone to my car. In another attempt to find companionship, I turned to my church. Carrie, a 50-year-old divorcee with long black hair, 34B chest, long legs, and a big smile, and I got along well. After a few dates, we went back to my apartment, leading to closeness. However, during the encounter, she began muttering her ex-husband Jim's name. The situation escalated as she screamed it during subsequent climaxes. I stopped immediately, explaining that I wasn't Jim. In response, she expressed genuine anger and questioned why I had stopped. In silence, I drove her home, and needless to say, there was no fifth date. For my next dating venture, I invited a coworker over for an evening of food and dancing. Allison Webb, a vivacious 42-year-old divorcee who had separated from her husband almost 5 years ago, was a blonde with slightly larger chest and a bump than someone of average proportions. We had been friends at work for about 10 years, and by this point, she had heard my sad story, and I had heard hers. Our great evening turned into several wonderful evenings, and we genuinely enjoyed each other's company even before our first time being make love. Looking forward to a great time at the wedding, I invited Allison to be my date. She responded seriously, expressing uncertainty about accompanying me to my daughter's wedding, considering the family dynamics with my ex-wife. I mentioned that she would need the green light from Bob, my wingman, a 45-pound German Shepherd mix with sophisticated taste. I explained that if Bob didn't like her, he wouldn't accompany me to the wedding. She found this peculiar and labeled me a strange person. After passing Bob's test the following week, Allison agreed to be my wedding date, bringing joy to the girls who were happy I wouldn't be attending solo. Tracy, however, appeared displeased with this arrangement, consistently giving me disgruntled looks. Since I didn't engage much with her, I disregarded her opinion. However, it bothered Allison, who sensed Tracy's dislike for her. At the rehearsal dinner, I found Tracy alone and finally confronted her, asking about her problem. Tracy responded with sarcasm, expressing disdain for Allison and questioning if I was now dating Girl Scouts. I noted that Tracy's jealousy didn't look good on her, reminding her that Allison, Tracy, and Kate were the same age. I playfully remarked that Tracy had traded me for a younger female version, and she responded with shy grace. A year later, Allison became my second wife, and life went on. Truthfully, I had completely forgotten that I was on the bone marrow registry when I got a call one day at work and was told that after 30 years, I was a match for someone. Thrilled at the opportunity to help save someone's life, I knew the bone marrow extraction would be somewhat inconvenient, but my hero complex made me more than willing to undergo the procedure. Further testing was required, and if it was favorable, the extraction would be scheduled for 2 weeks. After granting my consent, I told them I was on board. While not very religious, I believe in God, and there's an old saying that God works in mysterious ways. I never thought about it until 4 days later when I spoke on the phone with my oldest daughter, Lisa, during our weekly conversation. Ariel and I avoid discussing Tracy's life, but Lisa mentioned that bone marrow had been found for Aunt Kate, and they were actively involved. Through Lisa, I conveyed my best wishes to Kate and Tracy, expressing that despite the pain caused by their actions, I didn't wish them damage. Lisa warned that as an adult, I could call them myself. I acknowledged this, but explained that the less I talked to them, the less likely I was to say something unpleasant that I might regret later. Lisa encouraged me to come to terms with the divorce, highlighting that I've been happily married to Allison for almost 2 years. Acknowledging my happiness, I shared that while I no longer hated Tracy, she wasn't on my Facebook friends list. I decided to send Tracy flowers with a card of good wishes. Later, as I ordered the bouquet, a thought struck me. Bone marrow matches are rare, and the coincidence of Kate finding a match around the same time as me seemed too convenient. Aware of the anonymity in the donation process, I contacted my registry contact, pretending to be optimistic, and inquired about the likelihood of my match living in the same city. She stuttered and admitted it was the first time someone had identified their match. Frustrated, I realized I was going to donate bone marrow to Tracy. Angered by the situation, I reflected on how she stole my wife, never apologized, and now expected me to save her life through a bone marrow donation. I determined it wouldn't happen. 2 days later, I called my receptionist back and said I was refusing to make the donation. She almost burst into tears, and when she came to her senses, she asked me if there was any specific reason why I backed down. She explained that although I had the right to refuse, this was almost never done and would cause great consternation at the registry. I apologized for causing horror, but told her it was in my own best interest to refuse. She muttered that she was sorry and told me that if I changed my mind in the very near future, I should call her. Allison was furious when I told her I had turned down the donation. I didn't tell her that I found out who the donation was supposed to go to. She just knew that I had abandoned the obligation to possibly save someone's life. My wife expressed her frustration, practically screaming at me, questioning why, after expressing the desire to help, I now wanted to ruin someone's life. It was the first time I heard Allison use strong language, and I decided to be honest with her, explaining that I wouldn't have informed my ex-wife or Kate about the donation if I had a choice. She was unimpressed by my reasoning, accusing me of denying Kate a chance at life for revenge. I clarified that it wasn't revenge, emphasizing my efforts to have as little in common with my ex-wife and Kate as possible since they both hurt me. Allison questioned if they knew about her involvement, and I assured her that everything was done anonymously, and I only found out about it by luck. As I shared this, Allison's expression softened. She argued that I couldn't refuse the opportunity to save someone's life, emphasizing the weight of holding Kate's life in my hands. She whispered that I was too nice a guy to withhold help, and that the guilt would eventually consume me. I disagreed, stating that I wouldn't feel guilty as Kate and Tracy had broken my heart. I emphasized that they would never know it was me. Allison expressed concern, mentioning the hope they had and how my decision might have ruined it for them. Allison and I continued to have disagreements, and it felt like we were growing apart as a couple. Our differences seemed more pronounced than ever. At one point, she asked about my Christian charity, to which I responded by questioning whether I should blindly give money to someone who might damage me. She called me ridiculous in response. I explained that they hadn't torn out my heart and turned my world upside down like they did to me. I expressed my reluctance to simply shrug off the pain and help them after 17 years. I reminded her that Tracy had been married to Kate longer than to her and suggested she deal with it. Allison insisted they had made a decision, and I replied quietly that they could live or not, indifferent to their fate. A few days later, on a Saturday afternoon, I left the room, informing Allison that I was going to the range to blow off some steam. She reminded me to be back before dinner as the girls were coming and didn't want me to smell like gunpowder, instructing me to take a shower before we ate. I knocked the living crap out of the target with 500 rounds from my 9mm whitefish. I can't explain why, but shooting always relaxes me. I think it's because you have to really concentrate on what you're doing, and when you stop concentrating so hard, your body goes into a relaxed mode. At least that's my thought, and I stand by it. I definitely smelled like gunpowder when I got home. So when I got home, I quickly headed to the shower. I glanced at the dining table. There was set for 6 people, and from the smell, Allison was cooking a roast. She is a great cook, and I was hoping she would make these little brown potatoes instead of mashed potatoes. After taking a shower, I poured myself a glass of rye whiskey and brought Ellie a glass of wine. She seemed a little nervous, which I put down to her wanting the dinner to be perfect for the girls and their husbands. I kissed her on the lips. I was sitting in the living room reading on the computer when the door opened and the girls came in, not accompanied by their husbands, but by Tracy and a shabby-looking Kate. I wasn't happy to see any of them, and I shot Allison a glare as I stood up to greet everyone. I kissed both girls, but didn't say anything to my ex or Kate. I noticed that they greeted Allison with what could be called enthusiasm. There seemed to be a lot of whispering around. Not having been born yesterday, I immediately knew that Allison had orchestrated this little intervention. I was more inclined to think of it as an ambush, since apparently I was the only one unaware of the meeting. I thought about just taking my phone and leaving, but then I decided it was time for me to speak up. At first, however, I had to endure the excuse that it was just a nice meal with family and friends. Kate's illness was the main topic of conversation at the table, although I took no part in it. Sitting with what I thought was a thoughtful expression on my face, I suppose dinner and dessert were good. I really couldn't tell. Being the good host, I provided everyone with their afternoon drinks, and we moved into the living room. After a moment of silence, I decided it was time to express my thoughts. I questioned who would speak first: the woman who had betrayed my trust to arrange the meeting, the woman who had broken my heart years ago but now believed I owed her a favor, or perhaps the woman who had taken a married woman from her unsuspecting, loving husband and now needed help for a chance at life. As I made my statement, I looked at each face in turn, and none of the women could meet my gaze. Allison seemed excited when I called her name, and my eldest daughter, Lisa, took the initiative to speak. She acknowledged my lingering anger towards Mom and Aunt Kate, but criticized my refusal to donate bone marrow as childish and petty, stating it was beneath me. Lisa argued that seeking revenge by denying someone a chance at life was wrong, emphasizing that it involved a person's life, not a frivolous act like hitting someone with a whipped cake. I took a sip of rye whiskey and cleared my throat, shaking my head slightly. I expressed my anger and stated that every action in life has consequences. I noted that Tracy and Kate never expected such severe consequences, but were now trying to make their problem mine. I highlighted the unexpected opportunity to make a difference in the life of someone who had wronged me. Despite their belief that it was driven by revenge, I suggested it might also be a way for me to regain some self-respect. After all, how much self-respect could I have if I helped the man who stole my wife survive? And I don't think any of you even consider the fact that you think I should be easier on Kate because she's a woman. If her name was Carl and he was a 200-pound man, most of you would probably think that I would be right about what I do. But it doesn't matter to me that Kate is a woman. She's a wife-stealing cow. She knew what she was doing was wrong. Kate attempted to convey her feelings by staring intensely at the carpet. Seated beside her on the couch, Tracy reached over and gently squeezed Kate's hand. I asserted that my decision was not driven by revenge, but by hatred towards Kate. I expressed that I despised her, harboring no intention of assisting her in any situation. I highlighted my minimal communication with her during the 17 years she was with Tracy. Tracy sniffled, holding back tears, and questioned whether I hated her to the extent that I would deprive someone else of a chance to live. She appealed to my past love for her, suggesting that considering it a noble thing to do would be a matter of honor. I retorted, expressing skepticism about Tracy's notion of honor, calling her a fancy woman, and stating that she had no right to lecture me on what honor is. My volume level rose, and I tried my best not to tell them all, including Allison, to burn in hell and leave me alone. I took a couple of deep breaths, and Allison apparently decided that I wasn't angry enough with her. She quietly told me that I'm a good person and always do the right thing, emphasizing that retreating is wrong and that I would never be able to live with myself if I did that. Lisa interjected, reminding me that I taught Ariel and her to always do the right thing, even if it seems wrong. Acknowledging this, I asserted that my decision was for me, to avoid any regrets or loss of sleep. Kate suddenly exclaimed, pleading with me not to let her die. Despite acknowledging the offense I felt, she appealed to the grim reality of her situation, mentioning the slim chances of survival unless I donated my bone marrow. Kate's eyes looked haunted. Asking me to help save her life must have been the hardest thing she's ever done. I looked deep into those haunted eyes. I did not feel the joy of confirming my decision, but I confirmed it. No, that's all, I said. I didn't say the phrasey, "I'm sorry," because frankly, I wasn't sorry. I won't do anything in my power to help this woman. Kate took my answer better than Tracy, who burst into tears. Allison walked over to the couple to calm them down, and I heard her whisper, "I'll try. I'll talk to him." She was so caught up in the moment that Allison never realized that she had put our marriage in jeopardy. I will have to think long and hard about whether I can bridge the gap in our trust. I grabbed the car keys from the key ring where they were located. I walked out the door while 5 women cried. I didn't return for 3 days. I didn't answer any of the dozens of phone calls from Allison or the kids. The house was dark. I quickly looked around and decided that Allison had stopped somewhere else for the time being. A suitcase and some clothes were missing, but almost everything else was left untouched. I also grabbed my suitcase and packed a few things, taking most of my clothes and most of my belongings with me. I left my wedding ring in the middle of the kitchen table. 3 days later at work, I received an anonymous call that turned out to be Allison. She expressed disbelief that our relationship was ending because I refused to be what she considered the biggest idiot in the world. I responded by expressing my astonishment at being married to someone who had completely violated my trust. I suggested that both of us could fix the situation, and if anyone was seeking revenge, it wasn't me, but perhaps a higher power. I referenced the biblical saying, "Vengeance is mine, says the Lord." I criticized her for her actions and remarked that she really sucked. Kate passed away 2 months after our official divorce, and I learned about it through the local newspaper obituary. I hadn't followed her case, and none of my daughters kept me informed. Despite the estrangement from my daughters after the confrontation, I stood firm in my belief and stance of not helping Kate, and neither I nor my girls backed down. My decision was the right one for me. I never lost a minute of sleep over not giving Kate my bone marrow. The people at the bone marrow registry were not very understanding of my individual situation and completely crossed me off the list. I was fine with this because the likelihood of me getting a second match was extremely unlikely. Bob was a bit moody and not exactly thrilled with any of the women I'd brought home over the past year or so. But that was okay, because at 62, I wasn't really looking for wife number 3. Somewhat surprisingly, I was still getting my share of good closeness. I learned that at that age, eligible women outnumbered eligible men about 4 to 1. And if her health was good, there was a good chance my girlfriend was ready for a roll in the hay for the evening. Of course, we couldn't frolic with too much youth. After all, neither of us wanted to break a hip. But more often than not, we both enjoyed a nice roll in the hay. I jokingly called my ladies my handsome old singletons. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family for over 4 years. When my youngest Ariel called to tell me that Tracy had died a few days ago, she thought I should know and invited me to the funeral. We had 15 good years together and had 2 kids, so I figured I should at least show up. Maybe I can improve my relationship with the girls. I sat in the back alone. It was a good ceremony. After the funeral, I approached the girls and their families. I received shy hugs from the girls, firm handshakes from their husbands, and shy greetings from my 3 grandchildren. We went to a nearby restaurant to talk. About 3 minutes passed before the first salvo was fired. This came from Lisa. She abruptly questioned why Aunt Kate was allowed to die, and I responded, noting the unchanged nature of the conversation after 4 years. Referring to Kate as a wife thief, I asserted that it would be the final discussion on the matter. Changing the topic, I pointed out a young man at the bar, suggesting a hypothetical scenario where he kissed Lisa. Jerry expressed without hesitation that he would damage him, and when asked about a potential affair, he stated the man would already be dead. I drew a parallel, mentioning that since he would be dead, Jerry wouldn't have to worry about donating bone marrow if he fell sick. Jerry agreed, and I clarified that I didn't save Kate's life, partly due to her being a woman, which may have been a mistake. I asserted that I shouldn't have saved the life of the man involved with my wife or the one who stole it. Jerry agreed with the realization dawning on him, and he looked around the room, observing understanding gradually light up in each pair of eyes. I quietly shared that I wasn't proud of my decision, but not ashamed either, explaining that Kate didn't deserve my compassion for stealing the love of my life. Ariel questioned how I could withhold compassion if I ever loved her mother. I confessed to having loved her mother deeply, but when she broke my heart, much of that love turned to hate. Acknowledging that I was just a man, not the monster portrayed by her mother. I expressed that things didn't turn out well for her mother, and karma eventually caught up with her and her friend. Tears filled the eyes of the other 4 adults in the room, while the children looked confused and worried. I recognized that it would take time for all of us to come to terms with the situation and suggested that we not dwell on the past as life goes on. Tyson Summers finalized the last set of documents provided by Jason, crucial for Jason's management of a specific portfolio, among the largest under Ty's responsibility. This portfolio included the holdings of Wilson Graves, a billionaire investor and entrepreneur affectionately called Willie Graves. Willie thrived on using his wealth for hostile takeovers, acquiring stocks to gain control. Upon success, Willie's strategy involved rapid divestment to enhance his investment's value and involve other trusting individuals. Damn those who got hurt. Serving as Willie's lawyer and legal adversary, Ty successfully maintained Wilson's honesty and kept him out of trouble with the SEC and other federal regulators scrutinizing individuals like Graves. This allowed Willie to amass more wealth, benefiting Summers, Reinhardt, and Haynes Incan. Jason also made strides in managing portfolios for his other clients, aiming to gain full control within the remaining 2 weeks. This would conclude the 3-month process of transferring all of Ty's clients, excluding his special clients. Only Jason, Stacy, Reinhardt, and Clayton Haynes were privy to Ty's impending retirement. Ty reminded himself once more that it was time to let go and prioritize personal time. As one of the founding fathers of the firm, along with Stacy and Clay, they transformed it from a small storefront law firm into one of Columbus, Ohio's largest and most influential. However, this success took a toll on Ty's personal life, impacting both his marriage to Bridget and their family. Celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary last month, Ty and Bridget had 2 children, 19-year-old Jake and 18-year-old Tessa, both thriving in college. Despite the material comforts, Ty realized that Bridget's disinterest in their love life was a significant issue. While Ty's lovemaking drive remained active, Bridget attributed her low libido to a temporary phase, promising to discuss it with her doctor during her next checkup, which was almost a year ago. Their love life hadn't improved, and Ty, frustrated, chose to let the matter rest without further discussion. The source of his concern was Bridget's frequent trips back to her hometown of Mansfield, Ohio. She explained it was due to her mother's declining health, and her sister Bianca, who lived there, needed assistance. Both still resided in Mansfield, and Bianca, divorced and alone, benefited from Bridget's stay during these visits. Bridget felt it was the least she could do to relieve Bianca and allow her some free time. These trips started 6 months ago and now occurred bi-weekly, with Bridget departing on Thursday morning and returning late Sunday night. She maintained communication by calling every evening at 9 and ensuring her cell was always accessible. However, this meant Ty spent 3 or 4 days alone every other week, a situation he now disliked. Bridget left this morning for her latest trip, leaving Ty alone again. Despite his disappointment, he revealed to Bridget that he was working on a big surprise, ready in a couple of weeks. He even attempted to pique her interest by mentioning Stacy's involvement, hoping her curiosity or even jealousy over Stacy would make her stay and find out the secret. Bridget showed minimal curiosity, and Ty, not surprised, let it go and left her to packing. After their usual goodbyes, Ty left for work, knowing she would be gone within the hour. Later that day, Ty closed up his office, chatted with Rachel, his secretary, and walked down the carpeted hall to Stacy's office for a conversation before heading home. He knocked once and pushed the door open, a habit accepted by all partners accustomed to his unannounced visits. Ty greeted Stacy and suggested they finish work for the day, offering to buy a drink. Stacy expressed her reluctance to go home to an empty house. Another colleague, Roger, was waiting for her as they planned to attend their son's school play, where Roger Jr. had the lead role in Pirates of Doom. Ty teased Stacy about the play, but acknowledged that parents are naturally biased when it comes to their children's performances. Stacy laughed and agreed. At 46, happily married for the past 10 years, she reassured Ty about the progress on the project and declined assistance from Jason, noting that everything was on track. Concerned about Ty's upcoming retirement, Stacy expressed her wish to talk him out of it, emphasizing that he had been the driving force behind the company's success. Ty complimented Stacy's contributions and assured her that she, along with Clay and the younger team members, would continue to excel. He praised the younger generation's dedication, particularly mentioning Jason and expressing the possibility of offering Alice Chambers a partnership in the future. Stacy expressed her liking for Jason and Alice and mentioned that Raj would also attend the upcoming party. Ty welcomed Raj and bid Stacy goodnight, planning to see her the next day. Ty drove to his estate home in the Columbus suburbs, situated on a 5-acre lot and encompassing just over 5,000 scaff. It featured a hot tub flowing into a pool, a cabana, 2 tennis courts, and a spacious garden with flowers and flowering shrubs, providing color throughout the summer and into the fall. With the departure of the kids, Bridget had let go of the cook and maid, leaving the house mostly empty. Acknowledging that it was too large for the two of them, Bridget agreed they hadn't committed to it, but suggested it was time to consider moving into something smaller. Maybe they should give it a couple more years, she proposed. Ty parked in the 4-car garage and entered the kitchen, where he placed a frozen dinner in the microwave before changing into casual clothes for the evening. Returning down the steps, he heard the landline ring, hoping it was related to one of his ads, as it was too early for Bridget to call. Answering the call, he was pleased to discuss his boat, a 32-foot powered sailboat moored at Lake Erie in the summer and fall, winter-stored at a facility on the lake. After a fruitful discussion with someone who had taken the boat for a run with the marina owner covering for Ty, the deal was finalized. An agreement was made to send a cashier's check for the agreed-upon price to a post office box number Ty provided. Once the check was received, the title to the boat would be available at the marina. The purchaser had reviewed the title when taking the boat out for a trial run. Everything was in place. Bridget, who had never liked the boat and hadn't been out with Ty in years, would be pleased. With the boat sold and his Jaguar and Audi promised to successful high bidders, there was little left to worry about. 2 weeks from today, everything would be in place for his retirement. The house might take time to sell, but by then, Ty and Bridget would be in the smaller bungalow, ready for showings. He had already moved some furniture there, and any additional pieces could be purchased as needed. Ty mechanically consumed the frozen dinner and decided to relax with mindless TV and snacks. Taking a bottle of cold Miller Lite to the entertainment room, he opted for adult content, contemplating the lack of imagination in the scenes as the actors repeated the same actions in the same way. The movie failed to arouse him enough to take matters into his own hands. While the film unfolded, Ty pondered why the actors all followed the same script, gazing into the camera without any imaginative flair, merely aiming for titillation. He lacked the enthusiasm to engage in personal activities. At 9, Bridget phoned, and Ty answered, asking about any issues getting there. Bridget assured him of an easy trip and mentioned that her mom was doing a little better, but her sister Bianca was stressed. She suggested staying an extra day if it was okay with Ty. Despite feeling a clench in his stomach, Ty dismissed the discomfort and agreed, telling Bridget to do what she thought was best. He mentioned that he would stay at work a little longer, as it was lonely without her. Ty also inquired about Monday, asking if she needed anything and noting that she didn't take much with her. Bridget explained that she had things left behind and assured Ty that she would be fine. She then brought up the surprise he had mentioned earlier, expressing anticipation to find out what it was. Ty, somewhat surprised by her interest, informed her that it was right on schedule, with Stacy almost done with her part, and the rest already in place. Bridget promised to call him tomorrow night and said goodnight, ending the call with a simple, "I love you." Observing Bridget's eagerness to end the calls quickly, Ty noted that she didn't reciprocate his "I love you" with more than a good night. Despite this, he smiled, attributing her quick endings to her potential busyness with her mother. Ty then reflected on Bridget's family dynamics, noting the dysfunction and his own lack of fondness for her mother and sister Bianca, who had been divorced for cheating. So, the rest of my weekend alone continues, Ty thought to himself to occupy himself. He called the kids, talked with them for an hour or more, reminding them of his summons for them to come down in 2 weeks, and then just let himself go. He fell asleep on the couch and woke during the middle of the night with a stiff neck. He went to bed and slept without dreams. That was unusual, but Ty welcomed it. Lately, his dreams had not been pleasant. The next 2 weeks passed as normal, with Ty working to finish all his cases and make sure Jason was up to speed on all of them. He spent most of that second week calling his clients and letting them know of his pending retirement. They were, for the most part, happy for him and willing to work with Jason. A few wanted assurances from either Stacy or Clayton, and he made sure they were contacted right away. Things were all in place by that final Thursday when Bridget left for Mansfield. Ty had managed to keep his pending retirement secret from Bridget as planned. She rarely asked about his work anymore, so it was not much of a problem. In addition, she had forgotten about the surprise, and Ty didn't bring it up again before she left. He would mention it Sunday morning when she called to tell him she was about to leave, especially if she decided to stay an extra day again. Either way, Ty was prepared. Friday marked Ty's ultimate day, filled with bustling activity. Collaborating with Rachel, they cleaned the house and transferred paper files to Jason. Following a few more phone calls, Ty instructed Rachel to shift all his new calls to Jason, aligning with his plan. Having assigned Jason his secretary, Rachel had experience working with her. Ty's last morning task was telling Stacy to set things in motion, and she affirmed readiness. Though she left for the courthouse later that morning, Stacy promised to return in time for the retirement party at the Radisson Hotel. Despite everyone knowing Bridget couldn't attend, it didn't delay the proceedings, promising an enjoyable time. Ty left immediately after lunch to address several necessary tasks, and by 3 that afternoon, everything was in place. The final papers for the house were signed, and movers were already on their way, committed to finishing by late Saturday afternoon. Once the movers finished, the crew Ty hired to clean the place thoroughly would arrive, with orders to complete the task by that evening. They were promised a bonus if they finished on time. Realtors assured Ty that the "For Sale" sign would be in the front yard by late tomorrow, revealing a listing of interested parties who wished to view the property starting the following Monday. To their satisfaction, Ty had competitively priced it for a quick sale. The last task for Ty was ensuring that all financial arrangements were in place. Bridget and he had 2 separate accounts, aside from the joint ones, each with their credit card. It was Ty's insistence that they carried only 1 card each, disapproving of running a credit balance. Bridget, adept at financial management, was never frivolous with money. She skillfully managed their accounts, aware of Ty's private business accounts managed by his company. Unaware of Ty's accounts at the firm, Bridget, over the years, had neither inquired nor remembered. Retiring, Ty closed all joint accounts carrying both their names, transferring the retirement account to a new brokerage. Ty intended to manage all their joint affairs in cash temporarily, or at least until they had settled on everything. Since the new home would be located outside the States, Ty moved the accounts beyond the U.S., having already opened an online account with an international bank with outlets in Europe and South America. Ty was confident that Bridget would easily adapt to the change, as she was very intelligent about money matters. Finally, Ty confirmed that the tickets were in hand, contemplating spending the next several months with Bridget in a beautiful Costa Rican resort. Sun, sand, swimming, sailing, horseback riding, they had it all. Ty, having made a solo trip to the resort to confirm its authenticity, instructed Rachel to book the trip and make the reservations, desiring everything to be confirmed by the time of his retirement. Tyson was quite prosperous, accumulating substantial wealth from handling high-profile cases for affluent clients, charging accordingly. His clients, recognizing his expertise, retained him with substantial retainers. Ty invested his earnings in high-risk accounts, yielding significant returns over the years. As a lawyer, he leveraged his legal knowledge to move most of his money into offshore accounts legally, without any agreements with the U.S. These accounts remained intact, unbeknownst to Bridget, adding an element of surprise. If she were aware, she would be astonished at their value. Importantly, this money was outside the States, not subject to U.S. tax laws or the U.S. courts, had ensured everyone in the firm kept it quiet. Despite Bridget suggesting retirement, it had been dropped over the past year. Ty believed his retirement would please her, given her complaints about the time he spent at work. He informed everyone that it would be a surprise for Bridget, with plans to announce everything on Sunday night when she returned. Ty was confident she would be home Sunday, intending to initiate the surprise during her morning call. So far, everything had gone perfectly. The party was enjoyable, with Ty dancing with all the women and talking to all the men, sharing war stories of their most interesting cases. Jason spent most of his time around Ty, ensuring nothing important escaped his notice. Ty thought highly of Jason, foreseeing him as a valuable asset to the firm. Stacy and Clay, privy to all his plans, were sworn to secrecy. As his attorneys, Stacy subtly expressed pleasure in what he was doing. Ty danced with her, discussing the final steps. Stacy assured Ty that everything was ready for the surprise, documenting checks and amounts to ensure Bridget's surprise and Ty's satisfaction. Ty expressed confidence in Bridget enjoying the surprise, and Stacy sarcastically whispered her agreement. Ty laughed and shared that he had tickets for a Costa Rica resort with plans to leave Sunday night. He promised to call her with a permanent number, but mentioned that his new cell would be active in the meantime. He suggested Roger and Stacy do something similar. Stacy replied that she enjoyed what she was doing too much to quit at the moment. Ty encouraged her to tell Clay that he was sorry for not including him in all their plans. Ty stayed at the party until almost midnight before leaving. He missed Bridget's call, but found a voicemail. Bridget informed Ty that she was going to her mom's that night, asking him not to call her there to avoid waking her mother. She explained that her mother was tired all the time and needed rest. Bridget promised to call the next night and asked Ty to be home. She bid him good night. As Ty expected, she wouldn't call tonight after leaving her message. He spent the evening packing his clothes and ensuring Bridget's belongings were neatly packed. With limited time before Sunday night, Ty aimed to avoid return trips after the movers finished tomorrow. Careful and methodical, he packed her things, ensuring a smooth process without room for complaints. He planned to stay at the bungalow tonight and ensure all calls were forwarded to his new cell, starting tomorrow. Once he had transferred everything to the bungalow, Ty wrapped up his tasks, made a phone call to confirm the last piece of the surprise was in place, and then went to bed. Pleasantly tired from the party and on edge, he hoped nothing would go wrong as he fell asleep. Saturday marked the packing and moving of the furniture from their home. Though somewhat sad, Ty shrugged his shoulders and left the movers to their work. He was going back to the bungalow to meet their kids, arriving right around noon, and Ty needed to go over his plans with them to avoid surprising them too much. He had given them a hint of his retirement, but withheld details about Costa Rica or anything else. Now was the time to bring them up to date. He had to extract promises from them not to call Bridget and spoil his surprise, thinking they would be okay with that. When they arrived, he welcomed them inside, sat them down to begin filling them in. Making it short and to the point, he answered all their questions and gave details when they asked for them. Neither Jake nor Tessa were happy with what he was doing, but he assured them that their college tuition was taken care of and that they would always be welcome home, wherever that was. He reassured them that his retirement was something both he and Bridget had discussed and agreed upon as the right time. They wanted to talk to Bridget, but he made them promise to wait until Sunday night. When she got home, they finally agreed. They all went out to dinner that evening and kept quiet when Ty answered the 9 o'clock call from Bridget. She kept it short, as usual, but didn't mention staying any longer, so he still expected her. Sunday night, after the call, the kids once again discussed his plans, wanting to be sure he still wanted to proceed. Ty assured them he was fine. When they went to sleep in the spare room with twin beds, he made a phone call to confirm the movers were done, and the cleaning crew was scheduled. Both were affirmative, and Ty was pleased. One final call, and he was done for the night. Sunday was a day when little had to be done, and most everything was ready. He checked the house and found all in place. The movers and cleaners had left the place spotless and ready to show. He drove back to the bungalow and waited for the call from Bridget, telling him she was ready to leave. He expected her to call at her normal time, between 10 and 10:30. The kids had gone out to be with some of their friends from home, so Ty was alone when she called. He answered after the first ring. Ty nervously asked Bridget if she was ready to start for home. She responded that she was just beginning and explained that she would like to stay a few more days to give her sister Bianca more time to do some things. Bridget's voice was strained, as if she expected Ty to object, well aware that he would not like her request. Ty heard the words, and for the first time felt the anger that he had been holding in check for the past several months, struggling to break free. She wanted to stay a few days longer. Why? Well, he knew now, didn't he? He had known for over 3 months now, long enough to begin planning his surprise. Now was the time to bring his surprise to the front. Now it was time to do what he had planned for the past 3 months. Once he found out for sure, now it was time. As he reached this decision, Ty's anger finally surfaced, having kept it in check for so long. With the anger making it difficult to speak without shouting, he responded to Bridget's request by expressing that he wouldn't mind her spending a few more nights, sarcastically referring to her lover, Kevin. Ty confronted her about her involvement with both Kevin and another man, Ben, stating that it bothered him. His voice rose in anger, and he struggled to restrain himself from screaming at her. Ty accused her of carrying on these relationships for the past 6 months or longer, expressing his frustration at having to pretend it was nothing. Silence followed from the other end, broken only by a sob, and then the phone went dead. Ty stared at the phone in his hand, as if it were a snake about to strike. He realized that Bridget had hung up, and that was an unexpected surprise. He finally placed the offending instrument on the table, his hand trembling with remaining anger. She hung up, and he had no outlet for his pent-up anger. As Ty slumped into the chair beside the table, his phone rang sharply. He stared at it uncomprehendingly as the sound reverberated from the walls. The disposable phone he had purchased for this purpose continued to ring, not having voicemail. Finally picking it up, he pushed the talk button. Yes, was all he could get out. His anger had burned out with the sudden end of it all. He had been primed for an argument or a shouting match, a screaming match between the cheating wife and her scorned husband. Her abrupt termination caught him by surprise and extinguished his anger like a bucket of water on a flame. Now he was numb, dead inside, and numb with the pain he had been holding back with his plan of action. Without the cathartic outlet for his anger and hurt, he was suddenly helpless to stop the piercing pain that clutched at his heart. Bianca's angry voice came through the tiny speaker, urging Ty not to hang up and expressing concern for Bridget, who was described as a wreck and almost hysterical. She questioned Ty about what he had said to Bridget and what he had done to cause her extreme reaction. Ty redirected his anger towards Bianca, viewing her as a full partner in Bridget's betrayal and as guilty as his cheating wife. He sarcastically informed Bianca that he had simply told Bridget to stay as long as she liked, to spend extra time with her lover, Kevin Clark. Ty accused both Bianca and Bridget of being involved with Ben Stinson and Kevin, detailing their rendezvous at a motel. He expressed anger, stopping himself from screaming at Bianca, and dismissed her plea for him to let Bridget explain. Bianca tried to defend Bridget, insisting it wasn't what Ty thought, and describing the situation as a stupid mistake for which she was equally at fault. She pleaded with Ty not to do anything drastic and urged him to wait until Bridget could talk to him. Ty, however, remained adamant, revealing that someone would be there when Bridget arrived, but it wouldn't be him. He accused Bridget of discarding their marriage and stated that she wanted to continue the affair with Kevin. Despite Bianca's pleas, Ty informed her that he had already told their children about the situation, including the weekends when Bridget claimed to be taking care of her mother. Ty asserted that the children had taken the news surprisingly well. In response to Bianca's desperate appeal for hope and reconsideration, Ty reiterated that it was Bridget and Bianca who had discarded their family. Ty bid goodbye to Bianca and mentioned saying goodbye to her mother, noting that she never liked him, and now she must be laughing her skinny buns off. Ty disconnected, then looked around the small bungalow for the last time. Bridget will love it, he thought to himself. Then he laughed at the thought. He turned off all the lights, put the spare keys on the table along with the letter to Bridget, and went out the front door. He pulled the door shut, got into his rental car, and drove to Rachel's apartment. She was waiting in front of the building for him as he pulled up. He got out, loaded her 3 suitcases into the back of the car, and then held the door as she climbed in. She smiled up at him as he shut the car door. He walked around to the driver's side and slid in. Rachel expressed her readiness for the situation, mentioning the challenge of seeing him every day at the firm without being able to touch or talk to him. She credited Bridget for throwing Ty away, allowing her to snap him up and enjoy their weekends together. They drove away from Bridget's story, and Rachel revealed that when she called Ty to ask if he minded her staying a couple more days, she had a strange feeling that it might not be a good idea. She shared her conversation with Bianca, who laughed at the idea of spending more nights with Kevin and Ben. Rachel admitted feeling a twinge of guilt when thinking about her time with both of them, but that guilt failed to survive her thoughts of lust. She described a thrill of wetness between her legs when recalling the moments with Kevin and Ben. I shuddered once and picked up the phone. The conversation started as usual, Ty asking me if I was coming home. He sounded so normal, reminding me that this was a world that Ty knew nothing about and that gave me courage to do what I knew I wanted. I went for it, asking him if he minded if I stayed a couple of days. I looked at Bianca when I did, and her grin reassured me that I was doing the right thing. As I waited for his normal answer to do whatever made me happy, I thought once again to myself that Ty wouldn't mind, and he would never know what I was really doing. I would never let him find out because it would hurt him too much. I loved Ty. That was real. But lovemaking with him had lost its appeal to me, and now I had found an outlet that allowed me to continue to love my husband, but enjoy lovemaking with someone else. With him, I had found a wild side to myself that I never expected. I was thoroughly caught up in the illicit pleasure he gave me. I was pleased at myself, my own pleasure driving my lust to spend just one or even 2 more nights with Kevin and Ben. I was already imagining our night together, and I was becoming warm at the thought, until those words came out of the speaker and directly to my gut, destroying my world. Ty questioned why he should mind Bridget wanting to spend more nights with her lover Kevin, mentioning her involvement with both him and another guy, Ben. Ty expressed uncertainty about the duration, wondering if it had been 6 months or longer. He conveyed his frustration, feeling like he was supposed to pretend it was nothing. Bridget couldn't speak in response to Ty's accusations. I was frozen in fear and panic. I slammed the phone down, and I let out a loud sob. Just one, that's all. I was able to get out before it all became clear to me. Oh God, he knew, and my life was over. I was going to lose the only man I ever loved. I had to get home. I had to leave now to catch him before he had time to do something terrible. I grabbed my car keys and ran out of Bianca's kitchen. I started my car and backed out of her drive. I turned and headed toward the interstate and home. I had to get home. I had to. The drive usually took me 3.5 to 4 hours to make, but now I was pushing my car as fast as it would go. I was immune to any threat from the police who patrolled the interstate, and I cared nothing for speed limits. I had to get home before Ty had time to leave me. I had to talk to him, tell him that I loved him, and that I was a fool. I had done something stupid and selfish, but it didn't mean anything to me. Kevin and Ben were already gone. I'd never see them or Bianca again as long as I lived. I would tell him that I would give up everyone else if he would stay with me. Over and over, I rehearsed the words I would use to persuade him not to throw me away. I was seduced by Bianca and her lifestyle, and the lack of my lovemaking drive was a problem that she told me would disappear if I let myself go with someone who I didn't have to please or who I didn't care about. She convinced me that this would reawaken my lovemaking drive and that Ty would benefit. I was just going to try to get my drive back. But then I was seduced by the lust and the thrill of doing something nasty. It would revive me, and I would carry that back to my marriage bed with my husband. I was pleased at that. It would work. Ty would listen. He had to. 100 miles later, I asked the question Ty would ask. Why didn't any of that lust carry over? Why had we not made love in those 6 months since I had begun my affair? That was a question I had no answer for. I had to think of one. I had to think. I was still trying to find the words to answer that question. When I pulled into the driveway of our home, I was surprised to see 4 cars sitting in our driveway. I recognized the 2 cars belonging to my children, and I was surprised to see them there. But almost as quickly, a feeling of dread crept over me at their presence. I drove around them onto the grass and slid to a stop and clambered out of my car to run toward the house. As I did, I saw someone get out of one of the strange cars and move to intercept me at the front door. I ignored this man and reached for my keys. He tried to stop me, but I pushed him aside and slid my key into the lock. It didn't work. I tried again, over and over, but it wouldn't work. I threw it on the porch and held my face in my hands and began crying. I turned to the door and began pounding on it with my fists. I pounded until the pain in my hands forced me to stop. I looked around to see the man who got out of the car still standing there. He asked me if I was Mrs. Tyson Summers, and I nodded my head yes. He handed me an envelope and said in a low voice, "You are served, madam." He then took another, smaller envelope and handed that to me. "These are the keys to your new residence. The address is inside, and the property is yours without burden. You will find the deed and the necessary information inside." I took both envelopes and just stared at him. My mind was numb with sadness and pain. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a legal-sized white envelope. This contains several checks amounting to the current savings and checking accounts, which have been closed. This house has been listed for sale, and the proceeds will go to you once the sale is completed. All of this is included in the divorce statements, and the terms are spelled out very clearly. The man closed his briefcase and prepared to leave. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. "In case you've forgotten, this is the name of your husband's attorney." He moved away and got into his car. He spoke to the person sitting in the other car I didn't recognize before backing out and leaving. I was stunned. Holding the envelopes that the man had given me, I glanced down at the business card and saw that it was Stacy Reinhardt. That name caused a bolt of anger to course down my back, but it quickly died. Stacy was a problem only in my own head. I knew that, but I had used it over the years as a wedge to make Ty feel guilty. Now I knew better. But it didn't help to look up and see her walking toward me. "Hello, Bridget. You're not looking so well today. I just wanted to give you a heads up. Ty asked me to handle things in his absence. In case you're wondering and have lots of questions, I can give you some answers. First, Ty retired effective Friday. We all had a party for him. It was a great party, and lots of people came to see him off. Too bad you missed it. But then, you had other things more important, didn't you? Second, this house has been turned over to a realtor for sale. You signed your name to a power of attorney some time ago, and Ty used it to transfer the title into his name. But don't worry, the proceeds are all for you. Ty left it to you in the divorce. He also bought you a nice bungalow, paid for and furnished. Your children can take you there. Finally, Ty gave me full power to act in his behalf in the divorce and all his affairs here in the States. Ty has left the country, and I believe it is his intention not to return for some time." She stood there watching me as I digested the things she told me. It was as if each was a hammer that pounded the stake in my heart deeper and deeper. I was almost gasping for breath at the suddenness with which my life had collapsed in on me. I opened my mouth to ask questions, but nothing came out. I realized that I was smacked by a man whom I had blindly betrayed and disrespected so easily. A man that I knew in my heart was the only man I could ever love. Now I had lost his love, and I had no idea what to do. Suddenly, I was more alone than I had been over the last 20 years. I had my children and my life, but my anchor to all I cared about in this world had left me. I had never felt so alone in my life. I can't know why you did this to Tyson, Bridget. I know from working with him for the last 15 years that he loved you and his children more than anything in this life. When he found out what you were doing, it almost homicided him. Roger and I helped him through the crisis he was in and made sure he stayed calm enough to make plans to deal with you. We made sure he didn't do anything foolish. Just so you know, he considered self-damage, but we talked him out of it by reminding him of your children. He's with someone else. Now that also helped him through the crisis you caused by your actions. It's not important who she is, just that she is with him and will care for him as this slowly runs its course. Tyson will not agree to talk to you, and he doesn't care if you fight the divorce. That will be in my hands, not his. So do what you will. Just know that Tyson is out of your life and will never be back. She turned and walked back to her car. Without looking back, she got into the passenger side of the car, and it left. I walked slowly down the drive to my children, who were standing together beside the cars. I had to face them and listen to their anger and condemnation. But I really didn't care anymore. I had betrayed my husband, their father, and I had lost him, and nothing else mattered. Their anger at me would not make any difference. Nothing they could say or do could hurt any more than the words I heard from Ty just that morning. God, how they hurt. And all he did was state the truth as he saw it. As I stopped in front of Jake and Tessa, my grief brought me to my knees. Jake reached down and helped me to stand, but there was no concern on his face. As I looked at him, I saw anger, disgust, disappointment, but no concern. That was painful to me, and I began to sob. And instead of holding me, my daughter stood in front of me with her arms crossed over her chest and her face mirroring that of her brother. I had told myself that I couldn't hurt any worse after losing Ty in my marriage. But the looks on the faces of my children told me in no uncertain terms exactly how they saw what I did, and it was even worse. I cried for what I had lost. As my children stood by and waited, they offered no comfort. I had lost them as well. I turned and looked once more at the home Ty and I had purchased to build our family. I loved that house and had always felt pride when I came home. Now it was gone. Everything was gone. My husband, my marriage, the love of my children, and the home we shared. What have I done? Why did I never think of the consequences of my actions? Why had I never considered that? I knew now consequences are a whinge.